So I think we have everyone. So Bill is still in DC. He had some travel plans that he had made prior to knowing he was going to be on the committee that he was unable to change. Lauren has a family issue, and Robert was also unable to join us. So we are a little bit thinner of a crew, but we have Mavis, Hal, Aaron, Emma, Michael. So we have everyone else, and we have a quorum to be able to go forward. If you want to kick us off, Hal, I can share my screen with the agenda.
Great. So welcome, everybody. So we'll just go through and do a quick round of introductions. I know we haven't had an icebreaker in a while. So today's icebreaker is, along with your introductions, maybe share what your favorite Halloween candy is. So I know that I have so much candy in my house right now. It's just coming out through my ears, and it's everywhere. So hi, everybody. I'm Hal Hagedorn. I am the chair of OBPAC, and for my day job, I work at Portland State University at the Transportation Research and Education Center. And my favorite Halloween candy, I think, is Kit Kat. So I will call on Emma next, and then we'll just do popcorn. So after you do your introduction, you can call on somebody else to make their introduction.
Hey everyone, Emma Newman. I am the OBPAC Vice Chair, and I'm in Springfield, Oregon. My favorite Halloween candy would be Reese's Pieces, and I'll hand it over to Aaron.
Everyone, my name's Aaron Mendez. I am currently a third-year student at Oregon State University studying civil engineering. My role in OBPAC is under 21 chair. While I do spend 9 months out of the year in Corvallis, I'm originally from Southern Oregon, so that's kind of where my family's from. And my favorite Halloween candy has to be like the Snickers bars, just because I just love Snickers overall, and they're just like, they just make them fun size, so that's always my favorite. And I'll pass it to Michael.
I'm Michael Black, and I am in Southern Oregon. During my days, I represent the Ashland Parks and Recreation Commission as their director in the city of Ashland. So we don't have many, in fact, we didn't have anybody go trick-or-treating from our house, but I can tell you, raising kids, we've had plenty of trick-or-treaters, and I always steal all of their Reese's peanut butter cups. That's the first thing I go to. And then there's a hierarchy. I go down from there and end with maybe Starburst or something like that, and then just throw away all the other junk. So popcorn. Mavis, did you go? You haven't gone yet, have you? Mavis.
Hi, I'm Mavis Hartz. I'm in LeGrand, and yeah, I like Halloween candy. My mom used to make these like hand-dipped carameled apples. Kind of miss those, but I have to say that yeah, I eat it all, especially the chocolate. All right, so who are we missing?
I think that's it for our committee members, but Jessica and Karen, and I don't know if there are other ODOT staff that want to introduce themselves.
Sure. I'm Jessica Horning. I'm ODOT's Pedestrian and Bicycle Program Manager and the staffer for OBPAC. I'm an equal opportunity candy eater, so you got it. I'll eat it for you. Karen?
Karen Criswell, Public Transportation Division Administrator. So the bike ped, transit, passenger rail, transportation options programs are all within my division's portfolio. And I missed the starting question, but I think it's something about candy.
Your favorite Halloween candy or candy?
Oh no, none of the above, but maybe caramels or candy corn. I don't know.
Great, thanks.
Ooh, I know, nachos. I pick nachos. I
Okay.
deflect your candy and I go with nachos every time.
I like nachos too. Great. So with that, I think the next agenda item is public comment. So I don't know if we have anyone here that will be giving public testimony. So if you're interested, I believe you can raise your hand using the reaction. There's a raise hand function in the reaction. So
And I did not receive any public comments prior to the meeting this month.
okay, I'll just give it a second. All right, hearing none, I think we are on track with our schedule and a little early even. Karen, you're up next with the division administrator updates.
Sorry, a little slow with all of the technology today. You got me thinking about nachos and now I'm thrown. All righty, federal infrastructure bill. So the latest, as Trevor likes to put it, or maybe it's Travis, for our prognostications about the federal infrastructure bill. So we're currently operating under a continuing resolution that pushed an extension of the existing FAST Act authorization to December 3rd. And from what I understand, if history repeats itself, it's fairly likely that it will be difficult for Congress to take action by the 3rd. And we will likely see another continuing resolution that pushes it to a pre-Christmas deadline. And that is often when they typically actually get it done. So we're still looking at is the reauthorization. We're looking at a potential Build Back Better infrastructure package. They also have some work to do around the debt ceiling. I think we are cautiously optimistic, but less so than we were probably a month ago, that Congress will take action this year. If they don't take action this year, I think the expectation would be that we would get a flat line continuing resolution that would push it out a year, because once we get into next year, then we're into election year time and it's unlikely they'll be able to make it happen next year. So that's the latest that I heard just this morning on federal infrastructure. I think that's the only big update that I had for y'all today. I think. Am I forgetting anything, Jessica?
Nope, I think that's the only one we had on the list. It's been kind of quiet since the last meeting.
I will maybe also add on to that. We've been doing, even though we don't know when and if it's going to pass, we have been doing it. I think you received a presentation last time about what could be in a federal infrastructure package and starting to consider what we might do with discretionary funds. I think some of those conversations are continuing, and we are working on an outreach and engagement plan as part of that effort. And then I think we also will be doing, and you'll hear more about this later from Susan and Jessica when they debrief on the 24-27 strategic ped bike engagement that's happened to date. We have some other engagement plans that we should be launching on regardless. So more to come on that.
Does anybody have any questions for Karen, or are we ready to move on to the next item? which is committee business. So the first is we are really sad to learn that Michael Black is stepping down from his service on OBPAC. And so we just wanted to reserve this time to just thank you, Michael, for your service on the committee and serving for a number of years as the chair of OBPAC and helping us do a lot of good work as far as trying to move forward a variety of items in our work plan. And I think you were also a big help with just helping us to re-envision the vision and mission and the focus of this committee too. And I don't think we could have done that without you. And what I've appreciated from you has always been sort of, you are always sort of that voice of reason for our committee, very steady, thought-provoking, not, you do ask really hard questions, but you do it in a way that really calls people in. So I really appreciate all of your work and the years of getting to know you as well. And I hope you continue to move on to bigger and better things down in Southern Oregon. So
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, can I just take a second then? And so I just got a DoorDash delivery. I think Jessica knows what that's all about. But I've got like tons of stuff to share with you guys, but you're not here, and that really is sad. So I've got eclairs and a cake and some rosemary bread. So thank you very much for that. And I do wish I was with you so we could share it. I've appreciated being on this committee more than you can imagine. I've really enjoyed the work that we've done and getting to know all of you and growing from the experiences that we've had. I have to say, I really wish I didn't have to step down, but I feel like I need to make room for somebody else who can dedicate more time to the issues and to help you move your goals forward and to accomplish those work plan items. I think the work that we do is imperative for the health of every community. It's not just the big communities that need the active transportation and the transit and things like that. The smaller communities do as well, even down to the smallest. And I think that's one of the things that gets missed from time to time is that there are still walking and biking and transit needs even in those smaller communities. And I hope you keep that in mind going forward. And it's been great to get to know all you guys. I'm sorry that not everybody's here today, so I could say goodbye to you. And then Karen and Jessica and everybody, hopefully at some other time we'll be able to help out in some other role. And if you ever need someone for a couple meetings or like I'm helping out with PTAC right now, I'd love to help if I can. But unfortunately, I can't keep the schedule on these meetings right now. So thank you, everybody.
Emma, it looks like you have something to share.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Michael. I've super appreciated your leadership. You were chair when I started on OBPAC a few years ago, and your role modeling what that could look like was really inspirational and part of what inspired me to say, okay, I'll put my hat in the ring and go for a leadership position within the committee. I think that some of the moments that really stand out to me were when we were receiving some public comments that were not appropriate and could be harmful to some folks of a number of different demographics, but your steadfast commitment to making it a culture of inclusion and not tolerating those sorts of comments in this space was really inspiring. And through that, keeping your calm, being very articulate, you always have really valuable things to say and contribute. And you've also gone above and beyond through the individual meetings you've had with ODOT leadership. I think you really helped further walking and biking in the state of Oregon by meeting with the directors and assistant directors within the agency on behalf of our committee. So thanks for putting in that extra legwork, walking a few extra miles on our behalf, and everyone who walks and bikes or wants to walk, bike, or roll in the state of Oregon. So thank you, and I'm so glad we have you in Southern Oregon and can call on you for support here and there, and best wishes with what you're up to. I know you're doing good work, whatever you're engaged in.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And you guys you're in good hands with Emma and Hal. They're doing really good work and very responsible and responsive as well.
Karen?
Yeah, I just wanted to take a quick moment to pile on the love towards Michael. I stepped into this seat as a division administrator about a year and a half ago. And, one of the first things I did was having that one-on-one with Michael. He was still chair at the time. And Michael, you were incredibly gracious and giving of your time and helping me to understand sort of the lay of the land in the bike ped community, and from the community perspective of this committee as I was learning and getting started. And I really appreciated your candor and tough love at times as well. So just thank you very much for being a great introduction for me and for all of the many, many contributions you've given. And we will miss you.
Well, thank you. I could go on, but I'm going to miss all you guys, and I've enjoyed every interaction that I've had. Thank you, Karen.
And Jessica?
I'm just going to reiterate what Karen and others have shared. I think similar to Karen, you've been a constant presence on the committee since I started in my role 3.5 years ago, and have just really always valued your perspective and commitment to the group, and how you really make sure that we stay true to the values we've talked about around this table and put that into action when we're making hard decisions for the committee, whether it's membership or what we're going to fund, but making sure we talk through those equity values and other commitments that we've made as a group. Also wanted to share that we have your, is this going to work with my little blurry screen thing? Maybe not. It's a lovely certificate of appreciation that we will get in the mail to you, just to thank you for your time, in addition to the back payment of OBPAC meeting snacks that we hope you can enjoy at home. The big thanks to Kat for helping get all that organized, but we'll definitely miss you, Michael.
Thank you, but this is all the recognition I need, so thank you. Thanks, Jessica.
I was going to say that we have had a few members term off or step down during the pandemic, and I hope that someday we can all have a reunion of all the members who have served during these kind of unprecedented and changing times in person at some point.
Well, thanks all of you. It'll be tough, but I know you'll continue to do great work, and I can always look back and be proud of the fact that I served with you guys. So thanks again.
All right, with that, back to business. Okay, so the next item is to review and approve the September minutes. So hopefully everyone has had a chance to review the meeting minutes. So at this time, are there any comments, or can we move to make a motion to approve?
I make an motion to approve the minutes as they are written.
And I will second that. Emma.
Great. So all in favor, give a thumbs up. Okay, I think that was unanimous. Okay, sorry, now I'm having problems with my computer. I'm going to pull up the agenda to see what's next. Okay, great. So the September meeting Minutes have been approved, and then we'll move next into the work plan updates. And first up is the legislative policy. And we have one item underneath that, and it's the safe routes to school legislative concept that I believe Kaz will be presenting about. So.
Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kaz Zaidi. I'm the Strategic Planning and Communications Manager for the Public Transportation Division, and part of that role is legislative coordination. So I'll just give you a very brief update. It's a very straightforward legislative concept that we're putting in. And if I make any missteps, I hope Leanne and Jessica, as the subject matter experts, will step in and correct me. So essentially, the legislation, HB 2017, put in place some criteria around the Safe Routes to School program, in particular that K-8 would be given preference over K-12 in terms of when people apply for different kinds of funding. And then also there was a 1 mile radius around a school that was given as the maximum where somebody could apply for funding. Now, the federal legislation that we expect to be coming down sometime in the next few months has a 2 mile radius. And in addition, we've found that, and I believe also that it takes K-12 and gives equal priority to all funding applications across the entire range of school ages. So the legislative fix we're going for is, first of all, to change the 1 mile radius to a 2 mile radius, and then also to remove the preference for middle schoolers, so that any application is judged on its own merits rather than on what type of school it's serving. And then in terms of where we are in that process, we've just submitted to our government relations department a concept for a concept, if you will. That will then go through an internal review process, which we expect to be completed by March 2022. It's already made it through the first hurdle, which is that it's something that's going to be considered for that process. Then it will be up to the OTC to decide whether to approve it. Then it will go to DAS, and there'll be various discussions between DAS and the governor's office, and all of that back and forth in the legislature. And then it will be submitted as a formal legislative concept by December of next year, to be considered for the 2023 legislative session. So Leanne, Jessica, if I've missed anything, please do jump in. But otherwise, I think that's everything.
I would, Madam Chair, if I could tag on. I would just tag on, part of the purpose of bringing the concept to the committee today is we wanted to do a check-in with you to see if indeed this is a concept that's supported by this committee. Do you all think it's a good idea? And just to gather any feedback you might have for us as it continues through our internal process. So that was part of the reason for bringing it here. We also know this committee is interested in statutory amendments, the legislative process. So we thought it would be wise to come and do a check-in with you at this early point in the process. And with that, I will pause.
I think the idea of making it so that it is K through 12 is essential, because when you start looking at the high school, they are creating their futures and how they're going to function in their future. And if they go directly to driving when they are 16, then the likelihood of them falling back and then walking and biking is much, much lower.
I was thinking the same thing. Yes, Mavis, ditto that. I wanted to clarify with Karen if you're looking for a formal action by the committee or just discussion.
No, not looking for formal action necessarily, just discussion and, it's feedback that we can reflect and share internally as we continue through the process. Being able to say that we had shared and gathered input from this committee is useful, I think, for our internal considerations as well, and potentially for the commission, assuming it makes it to the commission for consideration.
Great. Well, I am supportive. This sounds great. For legislative work a little bit more broadly, is this the timeline that other concepts would have to follow, or do we still have opportunity to kind of put things in this lengthy queue that Kaz so eloquently walked us through? Or is this basically the time in which this needs to happen and then it closes out?
I think generally this is the process and the timing. We do have other concepts that we are loosely talking about, but things that haven't been written up yet. If there are other things that you would like us to consider at this time, I think we're happy to take that input in and reinvigorate some of those discussions. We have considered other concepts in particular. We've been talking a bit about the concepts or the legislation that was put forward in this past session by Street Trust and others, and looking at whether it makes sense for us to proactively step into that space, because there were quite a few components of that draft legislation that ODOT was very supportive of. I don't think we've fully landed in that thinking, because that's a pretty robust topic, and also we haven't been able to. And I see the Street Trust is here today, so consider this an awkward early introduction to that topic. We haven't been able to have those conversations yet with other potential external partners to see what the sentiment is in that area. And that may be something that others prefer to lead.
Yeah, I'm also very supportive of these fixes too. Anytime we can expand expand locations for consideration in funding bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, I think is a good thing. Also including and considering high schools as well is also important. Just to echo what both Mavis and Emma had stated previously. So yeah, overall great fixes to this legislation.
Maybe I can ask the alternate question. Is there anyone who has concerns with this? I'm generally hearing pretty strong support for this concept though, but I don't want to put words into your all y'all's mouths. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I keep on losing the agenda. So I think next on the list is, we're not quite to Mavis yet, but
I can support how the next item is the ODOT policy and adoption and implementation section of our work plan. And the first item within that is the outreach to the area commissions on transportation, the local bike ped advisory committees and modal committees. And so that's Erin and me. Okay. And I think Lauren had maybe expressed interest. Did you meet with her offline?
Yeah, so I met with both Lauren and Bill to go over the work plan. And this area is something that she felt like she can contribute to pretty well based on sort of her areas of interest and her work. So. But yes, I'll hand it over to you to go over that, provide updates.
Yes, I think the next step would be to have a work group meeting. I had taken a lead on the past round with the outreach to the bike ped kind of transit folks within the area commissions on transportation last winter, spring. And since we're coming up to a new year, we get to have a plan in place and then do outreach to the local committees early this next year. I'm looking at Erin, kind of hoping that you might be able to help the coordination and leadership on this and I can support.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I could definitely help with that and kind of take the lead. And yeah, I agree. I think a work group meeting would be really helpful to just kind of plan out what we want to do for the future.
Great. Would you be willing to help me send out a doodle to get something scheduled, hopefully by the end of November? And I know that Karen and Kaz both were interested in also participating. So I think it'd be you, me, Lauren, Karen, and Kaz.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely send that out so we can set up a time.
Great. Thanks.
Any questions before I hand it over to Mavis to talk about the Oregon Transportation Plan? Okay, it's all you, Mavis.
Sweet. Well, they asked me to be on another committee and I'm a sucker. So I said yes. So it is the Oregon Transportation Plan update. So what it is about every 20 years, ODOT goes, where are we going? And everybody gets together and goes, well, within 20 years, this is what we want it to look like. And so last time they attacked this, it was in 2006. They're hoping to be done winter of 2022, so we can have a nice little Christmas present next year. And we've had one meeting. It was really warm and fuzzy getting to know you. And I suggest it'll probably get much more interesting very soon, because of course they have everybody on the table. So there's, people for walking and biking. There's a lot of transportation. There's trucking is in there, a whole bunch of everybody that uses the system, and everybody has very strong ideas what the system should look like. And one of the things is I am on the committee as part of this committee. And so is there anything that you guys are looking for in, within the next 20 years that you're like, well, our transportation system needs to have this? So now's the time for your input. Anyone? Hearing none,
I'll jump at once. I have things to say, but I was trying to have someone else go first. A couple of thoughts that come to mind, and I don't know if this is the right plan and if they're already accounted for or not, but I'll toss them out there since you're our representative. Electric assist devices. I know that there's just been a huge increase in sales of e-bikes and e-bike related things, including the whole range of different classifications. I was just getting gas at Fred Meyer's the other day, and the guy pumping my gas was like, oh yeah, did you ride your bike today? Because it was in the back of the car. And he was talking about how he commutes on an e-bike, and thinking about some of the regional paths we have in kind of Springfield, Eugene area. I think some people are riding higher classification electric assist devices on regional paths when those should really be on the roadways. So just wondering about that, since it's evolving quickly and more e-bike and e-bike related shops are opening, while our more traditional bike shops unfortunately are weathering the storms of the pandemic and a lot of them not making it. And then the other topic that I'm thinking about is autonomous vehicles. I know that we had Cadell leading on that a couple years ago, and there was a work group, but making sure that the state is leading on the pieces that are appropriate for the state to lead on. I think NACTO's blueprint for autonomous urbanism would be a really good resource to look to, because there's some things that just aren't appropriate at the city or local level, and some things that really should be federal level. But I want to make sure that ODOT's
what was that book that you held up?
The NACTO, the North American City Transportation Officials Blueprint for Autonomous Urbanism. So I think that, technology can serve a fantastic purpose, but when it's not, if the policy and regulation framework isn't established to actually have it align with the goals and values of our state, then it could potentially do more harm or have unintended consequences. But if we get out in front with policy setting and say, this is how I want to use this tool in the Oregon context, it could actually have significant benefits with safety and, you know, not make walking and biking even harder. I was just on the OSU campus and seeing the little robot delivery systems for food completely blocking the sidewalks and making it so that anyone in a mobility device, good luck trying to get around. Even as a physically able person walking on the sidewalk, it was causing issues and pushing pedestrians out of the way. So trying to get ahead of that and not have things deployed and then make it difficult to kind of reel it back in.
The motorcycle versus e-assist. What are you guys thinking that needs to look like? Because you're right, we're getting all these paths, and I know around a lot of my Dewey guys, they have their bicycles, but they just have a throttle and they just zoom around wherever they want. And so what are you guys thinking on the motorcycle versus e-assist and categorization and things like that? Go, Jessica.
So one of the things that is in that big federal infrastructure bill that I don't think we covered with the summary that Karen gave last time, because it doesn't have a dollar figure associated with it, is they are proposing a federal classification system for e-bikes. It's that 3-class system that, oh, I'm blanking on, not the league. People for Bikes.
People for Bikes.
Like, yeah, has been promoting. So it is the e-assist is class 1, then with the throttle above capable of a certain speed. I should have this memorized by now, but I'm blanking on it. That is part of the federal bill. So if that passes, we'll have at least that structure at the state level, but still definitely opportunities to clarify things through OTP or through local statutory changes.
And I would hope that it would be grounded in physics. I remember being in a training with a Dutch consultant group talking through and mapping out on a chart the speed versus the mass of different people and vehicles, and then kind of grouping those into buckets, because the kinetic energy involved in a crash is what's really going to determine the severity. And when you have a really high speed light vehicle with a very large slow moving vehicle, that can still be a really bad crash situation. But if you have like grouped with like, so that as the speed and the mass is increasing, there's different categories, that can help with informing design and where different types of devices should or should not be used. Use the science.
And Emma, can you clarify your comment about e-bikes and community paths? I think you had mentioned, you had said it really quickly, and I just want to make sure that I heard you correctly.
Yeah, I am envisioning a future in Oregon where pedestrians and people riding pedal human-powered bicycles continue to feel comfortable on our regional multi-use paths and aren't being passed or feeling like they're pushed off the path by more motorcycle type devices.
Yeah, and I have that same concern, but I am supportive of e-bikes, you know, using paths, because for some, like e-bikes reduce it increases the ability for people to ride further distances. And so to me, if we can get more people on a bike, whether it's an e-bike or a regular human powered bike, I think that's a positive thing. But like going, you know, thinking through the policy and the unintended consequences of like preventing a certain, yeah, you know, so just making sure that we don't have the unintended consequences of if we're banning e-bikes from community paths, what does that look like? So, or what does that mean?
So what I'm hearing is that we are all going to take a trip to Amsterdam, and we're going to pull out what we want to do and take some lessons over there, and we'll come back with a really good idea. Work crew.
I just had another thought on the OTP, Mavis. Is there any so I think as we move into sort of the future and thinking about transportation and climate change, I think the concept of induced demand needs to be discussed by departments of transportation, by state departments of transportation. And so I want to make sure that in this next iteration of the OTP, that there is some acknowledgement that when you add more freeways or lanes of traffic, you're going to induce demand. So I think that's something that, I'm interested to see how that is being tackled versus just looking at the proliferation of electric vehicles as the sort of saving grace for climate change. But I think it needs to be induced demand, acknowledging that and recognizing that, another tool in the toolbox to fight against climate change is thinking more deeply about if and when freeways need to be expanded.
Personally, what I'm running up against is everybody is seeing it as their way of using the system is the most important. And the idea of sharing, for example, they sent out, what do you guys think about this? I think this is great. We have like 1.5 million more going towards building, walking and biking and stuff. And I posted it on our page here in LeGrand, and I didn't get much comments, but then the radio station picked it up and they posted it on their Facebook, and all of the replies to that announcement were incredibly negative, and so how to make people and users understand that it is a system and that people are supposed to play nice, and it's not just like a one group trumps all. And if you guys have great ideas how to do this, I'd love to hear. I think the Safe Routes to School thing where you're pushing up into the high school and getting those kids walking and biking and being part of that system prior to them leaving their house, I think that is a great way to kind of kick that off, but it's not going to solve it. So anyway, more questions or comments about the whatever committee, the Oregon Transportation Plan update?
No, just thank you for volunteering and representing our interests and representing sort of a multimodal and not just, a singular interest in those. So appreciate it, Mavis. And the next agenda item, we have blueprint for urban design implementation with the TBD around it, Jessica.
Yeah, so I can just provide a real quick update on this one. The committee had asked for an update on blueprint for urban design implementation, and I checked in with our technical services group. They have just kicked off. I included in the meeting packet a copy of House Bill 3304 that passed, and we talked about a little bit during the legislative session. That is a requirement for ODOT to create a report to the legislature on implementation of the blueprint for design, how that's going. And that has just kicked off. There was a meeting with our technical services group, chief engineer, delivery and operations staff, and government relations to talk about what does that report look like. It is something that they are going to be balancing, pulling together that information while they're also trying to stand up the update to the highway design manual to incorporate all of the changes in our design guidance that were developed in the blueprint for urban design. They're anticipating having a draft of the highway design manual updates sometime in spring of 2022. And I've already let them know that we'd love that is on OBPAC's work plan to comment on. And the report back to the legislature, it is a one-time report that is required in the statute, in the bill. That is due September 15th of 2022. So it's going to be an interesting timing for that report, since it is about midway through a current STIP cycle. And so a lot of projects that were underway when we adopted the blueprint for urban design, and we're applying it as we can mid-process. And then we're just going to be getting towards a 100% list for the next STIP cycle. So a lot of projects that we've got scoped and have an idea of how the blueprint for urban design is influencing what we're programming and what we're designing, but we don't actually have it on the ground yet. So that is really my long-winded way of saying I'm anticipating we'll have some folks from our technical services project delivery group on the agenda in January to give some more updates on how that effort is going.
Yeah, that sounds great. And thank you for clarifying the timeline. So we'll be able to actually have a report by September of next year, right?
Yep, September of next year is when it's due to the legislature.
Okay, great. So I think like inviting those folks to come present in January, I think is great timing. All right, expand funding policy and programs. That's on the committee business, but we have no items underneath it. So we'll just move into the organizational health. And Jessica, you have a number of updates to share.
Hopefully these should go pretty quickly. First one is, this is the last OBPAC meeting that we have on the calendar for 2021, because we've been going with the virtual meetings on odd months. So we need to figure out how and when we would like to have our meetings play out in 2022. I sent out a Google form invite that most of you were able to fill out with some information on when you would prefer to meet and in what formats. Generally, it looks like there is the most interest in continuing even after January, when public state offices open again. I'm just gonna cross the fingers there, because that has been moved back several times now. But even after we go back to whatever new normal, there's an interest in keeping our meetings primarily virtual with 1 or 2 in-person travel meetings per year, and keeping the meetings in a 2 to 4 hour every other month format, rather than going back to, for a little while there, we were doing the shorter monthly meetings. Odd months still seem to work best for the majority of folks who responded, and on the 4th week of the month. But I think the question is, Wednesdays don't seem like they work the best for the folks who responded. Maybe going to Tuesdays or Thursdays. And there's equal interest in mornings, afternoons. So what I am thinking is switching us to Tuesdays on the fourth Tuesday of odd months. And it's up in the air whether we do that from 9 to noon or keep this 1 to 4 time slot. If folks have any thoughts.
I'm just scanning my calendar right now.
Yeah, this is the in-person. Everybody gets their phone out, everybody gets their paper calendar.
For me personally, I think I'm fine with it being on Tuesdays, but I'd prefer afternoon. I think most of my classes next term will be in the morning. So
Okay.
I have a slight preference for the afternoons. It just allows me a little bit more time to do last minute prep for the meetings if need be. So outing myself as a procrastinator, I guess.
Mavis, the afternoons on Tuesday generally work for you in your schedules? That would put us meeting on Tuesday, January 25th as our first meeting in 2022. Then we would have March 22nd. Oh, wait, I'm looking at the wrong. No, March 22nd. May 24th. July 26th. September 27th. And we would probably once again want to reschedule our last meeting, our November meeting in the year, so that we're not landing on Thanksgiving week. So it would be November 22nd. We could just move that up to the 25th or move it back to the 29th. Or to the 15th, or up to the 15th or back to the 29th.
This, my calendar is fairly clear because this is so far out. So that makes sense. I would like us to consider at least one in-person meeting because I do value having that sort of connection. And I feel like in some ways we've lost that over the last year and a half. And it would be really good to reconnect, and hopefully by March, that might be a good time to reconnect. Or is that when you said March or May?
Yeah,
May,
March
May.
22nd or May 24th.
Yeah, May is typically when we have sort of our 2-day, right?
Mhm.
And so it'd be great to see if we can do that in person again.
I love your suggestion of in-person, how I'm supportive. I will note that May tends to be when workload is peaking because I have tons of stuff happening from the launch of the year, and then May is bike month gets layered on top of that, and all the commute challenges and things. I don't know if that's the same for others across the state. So my preference would be in person, maybe like March and July or something that's not May.
No, and that's fine too. I was just thinking May because the weather is not as much of a factor. But I'm happy to do March and July or any, yeah. So, but just to have just have a couple of in-person meetings, I think would be helpful. So.
Yeah, I think how we've kind of historically done it is the February or March in-person meeting with a little bit more focus on work planning and things like that. And then the July, August being a little bit more the site visit, going to tour different facilities that the committee's had a role in helping to fund. We can always do site visits in March as well, as long as everybody's got their rain gear. But Erin, how do those dates work with your school schedule as far as you know it?
I think the January meeting, I think I should be fine. And then by the 4th week of March, that'll be spring break. So there shouldn't be any conflicts there. And then after that, I'll be doing my internship until September. So I think I should have some flexibility there as well.
Okay. I just know we had a couple of meetings that landed smack in the middle of finals for you. So
Jessica, we are about 5 minutes behind
Oh,
and you have 3 bullet points to get through.
okay, well, that one we've got dates. The next one should be quick. OBPAC is about due for another work plan update. On the staff side of things, we are also due for an update of our 5-year implementation work plan for the pedestrian and bicycle plan. So looking for folks to think about if they are interested in participating in a working group to coordinate with staff, both on the OBPAC work plan update and the OBPP work plan. If folks want to chime in for that, you can just chime in the chat, or I can follow up with folks via email. The other is with Michael's departure, we need to do a recruitment for a new local government and for a new member. Michael is currently serving as our local government and land use representative. Those are 2 different representations that are required per statute. Emma can take on the local government crown. And so we do need someone who can fill that land use position. We had a pretty good response to the last recruitment, had 21 applications and interviewed a few folks that were good candidates. Also had some good candidates that we didn't offer an interview to. So the question is, do we want to try to just revisit that current applicant pool that we have for the recruitment, or do a full new recruitment and see if we get new folks who are interested?
I think my question is, how many of those fit the land use criteria?
That is a really good question. Honestly, kind of similar to the environmental group. Land use is, as an area of focus, is a little bit different in 2021 than it was in 72 when the statute was created. So yeah, I think we have to kind of look at those and talk about how do we even define land use right now.
Yeah, I feel like we should define it before we fill it. So, but Michael, go ahead.
So I think Emma could fill the land use side as well. Don't you think, Emma? I mean,
I was trying to figure out how it's defined. So, I mean, it could be interpreted any number of different ways.
All right, so
and potentially Robert too, but I don't know. I mean, again, like, how are we defining it? Or how is it defined?
it is not defined in the statute, but I will take a screen through the candidates that we have and see if I can come up with some sort of estimate of who is maybe a land use representative in that bunch. And I'll just ask around a little bit more to see if there's any similar requirements on other committees.
And I might caution, if folks were recruited and brought into the committee to represent a particular perspective, we should probably continue to respect that selection and recruitment process and not just, say, Emma, you can represent 4 different perspectives at once. I didn't think that was like a serious suggestion, but just in case.
I appreciate that, Karen. I just was thinking, I was applied and appointed to OBPAC as an individual citizen in the state of Oregon. So I'm not representing my employer. I mean, I bring knowledge from my professional expertise, but I think that's a good point. I also don't want to limit our recruitment. If we can have more flexibility, I'm more interested in achieving more diverse representation on the demographic side of our committee membership than specifically making sure that we have, land use and local government. Those aren't as significant in my mind to a variety of different perspectives.
Yeah, and I think that's my point. I think you can cast a wider net and you get a lot more results from your application process if you don't have to limit it to just land use professionals, for instance. And just to be clear, I am a certified planner. I have a degree in planning, and I've been a planning director in the past, but right now I'm the director of Ashland Parks and Recreation, and I do some consulting on the side, but it hasn't been traditionally the kind of steadfastness to your calling, where you have to be serving as a land use professional at this moment, and your title has to include in things like that. I think otherwise it wasn't like that before, anyways. So.
Well, I like that context and reasoning. In which case, if I can continue to serve on OBPAC just as myself and my expertise and my life experience, then I think we could make the case that I could fulfill both of those designations if we want to go the route of kind of broader recruitment.
And then if I could just expand a little bit further, I don't know, we haven't defined why it needs to be that either, but I do think there needs to be somebody or multiple people on the committee who do understand land use and the interaction or the intersection between land use and active transportation. And it's a huge intersection. But I do think multiple people actually feel that on the committee right now.
Okay. I think that maybe a point of clarification, if I could. Part of why I was bringing that up is I know Jessica walks and the committee walks the line of what is required in statute for constituencies that must be represented on OBPAC, but I also 100% agree, being able to bring people to OBPAC who have that experience, multiple diverse experiences that they're pulling from all of those experiences. That just makes the committee richer in the input that you're able to give us richer. So I get it. And I appreciate that kind of thoughtful consideration.
So we should acknowledge the fact that that legislation is 50 years old. And perhaps we need to propose a legislative fix to amend the composition of our committee, because I think one thing that is clear is it would be great if we had more than 8 members, because there are other perspectives that we feel like we're missing, but we're very limited by the fact that we only have 8 seats. So that's one consideration. And then just revisit, like, does it still make sense that we are sort of limiting it to the composition that was written in statute? Does that still make sense moving forward?
I love where your head's at on that. How I think over time, the committee's needs and the constituencies that would serve us well have changed. And so perhaps removing some of that language from the statute and kind of putting the determination elsewhere, whether it's through administrative rule or some other process, might make sense. So thank you for that.
All right, so I'm hearing from the group that there's a desire to cast a broader net and do a larger recruitment, but also still consider the folks that we have in the from the recruitment that we just completed as well. Does that sound right to everyone? Okay. So
yeah,
right
and then
now,
we can just ask for volunteers via email.
Yeah,
so we
right
don't
now I
have
have
to take care of
Aaron
it
and
right
Robert as our recruitment folks. So I'll start with them and work from there. Then the last item is just discrimination and harassment training is due every year. Hopefully everyone received a Workday email. We now have, with a transition that's happened at the headquarters level, of all board member and committee members are now tracked in our Workday HR and online learning software. We all get to take the Intro to Boards, Committees, and Small Entities training again, as well as a information security training. The information security training luckily has a pretest, so you can go through and share that you are savvy with passwords and the internet and can test out of it. So it doesn't take that long. The other two will both take about an hour to complete and are something that committee members are asked to do within 6 months. So if you did not receive a Workday email with those links, please let me know so I can make sure you're set up right in this new system. And thank you for your time doing those trainings. Right, that's it. Sorry for going over.
Okay, I see Susan has popped in to talk about the 24-27 STEP and Bike Ped Strategic Open House update.
Hi guys, Jessica, I just tried to share my screen as it was disabled. Can you either allow me to share or run the PowerPoint?
Yeah, let me just share the PowerPoint because that's where I'm at with Zoom knowledge still right now. Sorry, everyone.
All right, so again, my name is Susan Python. I am the Public Transportation Division Strategic Investments Manager, and I'm here today to talk, give an update on the 24-27 STIP, the active transportation, public transportation programs. However, I'm here to specifically provide an update to the PED Bike Strategic Program. So I was here in, I think the last time you guys got an update on this was May, late May. And we've done a lot of work since then, including develop our 150% list for the PED Bike Strategic Program. So what I'm going to do today is basically kind of tell you where we're at with that 150% list, go over some of the very, very preliminary results of our online open house that we hosted, and then run through some next steps for folks. And I know we are tight on time, so I'll probably run through these context setting slides that you guys have seen before pretty quickly. But stop me if you've got a specific question here. Okay, context setting. The strategic action plan that the OTC adopted in late 2020 is intended to guide all of our decision making. The outcome for public and active transportation includes improving access to active and public transportation with a metric of increasing the percentage of agency funding dedicated to projects that improve equitable access for walking, biking, and transit. So kind of with this guiding us, we guided the Oregon Transportation Commission in an allocation of $255 million dedicated for public and active transportation in the 24-27 STIP. That's the statewide transportation improvement program. Next slide. As a reminder, we had of all the public and active transportation funding programs within here. This is the Public and Transportation Options Program. And this is in your packet, so you can kind of dive into some of the numbers here at another time. Next slide. And then the pedestrian and bicycle funding as well. I'm here to talk specifically about this, the two red line boxes, the PED Bike Strategic, that $45 million, and the ODOT Safe Routes to School Infrastructure Fund, that $10 million. That's $55 million of federal funds specifically dedicated for the state system. As a quick reminder, that ODOT Safe Routes to School, $10 million there, that is intended to essentially replace any allocation of House Bill 2017. Those are the state dollars from that House Bill 2017 legislation that ODOT could, like, theoretically could have gotten through the competition. ODOT is an eligible applicant for that competition. We said, made the policy decision to say, we are not going to apply for House Bill 2017 Safe Routes to School funds during this time frame. Instead, we're going to use kind of harder to, more challenging to manage federal funds, but ODOT is pretty good at managing federal funds at this point. to pay for our access to improving access to schools and projects along the state system. So in sum total, we've stood up a program of $55 million, or we're standing up a program of $55 million of federal funds for the state system. Key contacts, I'm providing leadership over all the public and active transportation, the development of all the public and active transportation programs in 24-27 STIP, but Jessica, lovely Jessica, is our program manager. She's managing this program with support of Leanne Ferguson as well. Next slide. So this is again a repeat of what you guys have seen before, but it's important to impress upon again. The program goals are to address gaps for people walking and biking on the state system, kind of hitting those key pieces of missing sidewalks, bicycle facilities, and crossings, very kind of those three key areas. Number two, prioritize projects in locations that provide a safety and equity benefit. And three, even though it is $55 million, you think it'd go very, very far, it does not. And so we needed to identify cost savings through leverage opportunities with other ODOT projects, such as repaving, curb ramps, or all-road transportation safety program, but only at high priority, high need pedestrian and bicycle locations. Next slide, please. So when we talk about high need, and you guys have heard about the active transportation needs inventory, but we just the active transportation needs inventory, which was completed in March of 2021, was immediately put into place. And this is a management and system that informs investments. It's an inventory of the existing pedestrian and bicycle and shoulder facilities, and assessment of those facilities based on our minimum design standards, and an evaluation of those gaps and deficiencies. So we got the money allocated in January of 2021, started to frame up the program in March of 2021. We had a complete statewide inventory of our needs, and then we really got to work. So we're able to put this inventory into action immediately. Next slide. So our project selection strategy have an emphasis again on kind of that cost effectiveness through leverage, also project readiness and capacity. Even though we're talking about 2024 to 27, that actually we need to get projects going really quickly in order to hit those construction deadlines. We're also looking at projects in the top 10% of the active transportation needs inventory. Unless we're talking about the Safe Routes to School projects, what we did with Safe Routes to School is to take a look at previous applications that ODOT had submitted for the Safe Routes to School program, and said if they're in the top 20% of our active transportation needs inventory and in a community under 5,000, we would consider those as well on our 150% list. We wanted to look at the leverage of other ODOT projects, as I mentioned, and we did develop some standalone projects, not just leveraging projects in the kind of that top 10% of the ATME, but the standalone projects needed to have a very high bar of the top 1 to 5% of our ATME needs. I'd just like to say the ATME needs, it's a lot. It's all over the state. It's a high level of need. And so even that top 1 to 5% is a magnitude more of need than we had available in terms of funding. So here we are at our 150% list. Jessica, I didn't ask you if you would explain this slide, but would you like to kind of explain this slide, the 36 projects and to things?
Sure. So we have 36 projects on our 150% list. And these were all included in the interactive map on the PedBike Strategic Virtual Open House that hopefully all of you had a chance to check out and participate in. 8 of those are Safe Routes to School projects, and those are projects that were previously identified either by ODOT or a local partner and applied for in the previous round of Safe Routes to School grants. Scored really high, meets all of those criteria that Susan just talked through, that we've been looking at, but didn't make the cut for funding in the last round. So we've advanced those onto our 150% list for the 24-27 program. Of those 36 projects, 31 are being scoped, and 7, okay, I'm confused by my own math right now, of 31 plus 37 and 36. So somewhere I've got a typo on this slide that I need to fix. But we have 7 projects that we were able to advance for delivery in 21-24. And 5 of those are SWIP strategic funded projects. So those were the projects that OBPAC selected for funding at their last several meetings. And 2 of those were PedBike strategic projects that are in top 1 to 5% locations in the state. And they had an opportunity, if we could advance some of the funds to start design, we could leverage a project in the current STIP and get things on the ground even faster. So we have 2 projects where we were able to do that. Anything else you wanted me to say about this one, Susan?
Yep, I was snickering because I've been using this slide and I didn't catch the math error either. I'm like, it's a slide. So thanks so much, Jessica. Next slide. So our public involvement has included a webpage, obviously, but we've been doing discussions with all the advisory committees. With the I've hit almost all. I think my last one is tomorrow. The area commissions on transportation twice. With an information about kind of all the funding programs. The second being a overview of the PedBike strategic and the 150% list, letting them know about the open house. We've also, Karen and I have presented both at through the League of Oregon Cities and then also the Association of Oregon Counties. We had 150%, we had an online open house with information on our 150% list that was open from mid-September through the end of October. Next slide. And so as of Friday, I received information from the online open house. It's really, really rough. And we're in the process of going through that, but I wanted to have a couple of snippets of this information up on the slides for you guys that you may or may not have find interesting. So it was open for 6 weeks. Go back. It was open for 6 weeks. The primary mechanism for delivery of this information included our Gov delivery system with lists of over 2,500 to 16,000 recipients. Kind of went out 6 times to different lists. It had a high opening rate, which was great. However, we do think that we were kind of hitting a lot of the same people. We did request all the acts send it out. We had some social media. There was a lot of Twitter, some earned media, including Bike Portland. And as Mavis highlighted earlier, it sounds like it went out through a radio station in LeGrand as well. Next slide. I think we ended up having about 470 responses in some total. And here's some information, kind of where our age, race, and income information lie. This will likely change a little bit based on the new numbers that we kind of the final look at it all, because this was a couple days early. Kind of see we hit that like 26 to 60 range, not super surprising in terms of age. Also, our race information really demonstrates kind of the limitations on our outreach and our need to do better. Looking at 75% of the respondents identifying as white, and 14% choosing not to answer, with 3% identifying as Hispanic or Latinx. The additional people that identified as other races is actually really small. And then our income levels are really looking in that, we're looking at 51 to 100K standpoint. Next slide. So in general, and this is kind of some of the information we dug into yesterday, 57% of the people who responded were generally supportive of our projects. The rest of the folks, we're like, how, tell us why you feel this way. And 17% of the folks was kind of in that other category. 12% thought there were more important projects in their area that we did not identify. 11% said no projects in their area, and 5% just said seems fine. Next slide. Projects with the most interest, and the most interest, we're really intentional that this information from the online open house is not part of our framework for decision making on the 150% to 100% list. So the projects with the most interest are not the projects that are intended to be funded, but it is important to understand kind of where the interests lie. And that is information we'll package and give to the regions, in addition to, actually, I'm going to stop real quick and say the information that we, like the key pieces of information that we asked from folks that were really clear in saying, this is how we will use it. We asked people specifically, do you have experience at this project location? Tell us what your barriers are for walking and biking here. And then we're bundling that information up, and we are taking it to, we're going to hand it over to the scoping teams. So the scoping teams have a much better understanding, hopefully, of the user experience at that project location. And so that we're trying to be very explicit, like your input here will influence this process, right? We're still working on our framework for the 150 to 100% list. Jessica will talk about that in just a minute, but did want to provide information to you guys about what had the most interest. And so we're looking at Tigard, a Hall Boulevard project. We're other, let's see, TV Highway, Oregon 99, in Corvallis at South 3rd, McLaughlin Boulevard, and Barber Boulevard. So it's not super surprising, especially kind of I think about 40% when I was looking yesterday of the respondents were from the Portland metro area, that these were the projects with the most interest. And then also 279 people out of the online open house provided like specific information about problems, barriers at the project locations of one of the 36 project locations. So that'll be really helpful information to provide to our scoping teams. We did ask the question, if more funds become available, as Karen was talking, for example, federal infrastructure funds, we asked people like where they would like to prioritize where that money goes. Number one was physically separated bicycle facilities, crossing improvements, sidewalks, shared use paths, and then 5 was striped bike lanes. There were more answers to that. These are the top 5. Other ideas, like in the other, is kind of where our like access to transit pieces came out. Looking at road restriping to add bus lanes, more protected crossings near bus stops, better coastal and rural bus service, and a bicycle library for low income and visitors. So our next steps, we're in the process of analyzing these responses, and then we're going to provide the input to the scoping teams along with some of those kind of like bigger picture pieces to the appropriate people in the agency leadership, such as region managers and area managers. We're also compiling like a 1-2 pager kind of overview of the open house for public consumption that we intend to send back to the respondents in order to close the loop. We're really working hard to say like, thank you. Like your input is very meaningful. We used it in these ways. This is the information we gathered to really help that engagement effort. Jessica, here's your bullet on developing the framework for 150% to the transition to 100% list.
Yep, real quickly. So 150% list, that means we know it's more projects than we can fund. It's 50% more money than we have. And that is in case when we go out for scoping, we find out, oh, there's a brownfield and protected habitat and all these other things in this area where you want to build a sidewalk. It's not ready and you don't have enough money for it. So we go to the next project that we have on the list. The process for trimming down from our 150% list to our 100% list is going to happen over the next 6 months to a year, with really front loaded on that next 6 months of We are currently waiting for all of our scoping notes to come back from the regions. Scoping is when all of the technical experts go out in the field and sit in front of Google Maps together and tell us about all of the things that our projects that we want to build trigger to meet all of our state and federal requirements, and other opportunities that they see out in the field as well, and with a real world cost estimate and scope. So we will be getting that information back from regions in January, and going through that, identifying some criteria we want to use as our filters for how do we evaluate these. That's most likely going to be very similar to what the committee used for the SWIP strategic project evaluation, of looking at the overall active transportation needs inventory score, the transportation disadvantaged index equity score, safety, possibly some sort of cost return on investment. Look, if we can come up with something in that area, going to the regions, asking them what their priorities are, and doing some more outreach to figure out how do we, with some good basis based on our policy priorities as an agency and the data that we have, trim this down to a list of projects that we can actually deliver with the funding we have available. And all of the Fix-It programs at ODOT are going to be doing this kind of along the same timeline, with the goal of getting a 100% draft 100% list to the Oregon Transportation Commission to discuss sometime in summer, fall of 2022.
Thanks, Jessica. And then we're also working to see what we can get ready sooner, and like how, if there's any opportunity to move up some, like a preliminary engineering phase into 21 to 24. I mentioned we were communicating back about the 100% list, or the process for the 100% list, and the input from the open house. And generally, our next steps is to do better, always do better. Identify program improvements in public engagement and our internal processes. This was a new program that we stood up in a short amount of time, and I'm really, really proud of the work that everybody did, and Jessica did's done an amazing job over the last several months. But we're always looking for opportunities to streamline, improve, engage more, things like that. Next slide. So how I included a couple prompt questions for discussion. I know we're behind on time. So I'll leave it up to you, Jessica. Is there a next slide, or is that the end?
That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Susan, for presenting. Let's just spend a couple of minutes on questions if folks have questions.
The prompt questions that I had were just about specifically our suggestions on engagement and experiences with the online open house for people at Ticket. Just in that last bullet, and the do better. We're totally open to recommendations on how we can do better. Really appreciate any feedback you guys have.
So I did have a question. So on your slide that shows a breakdown of the race, I think it only added up to like 89% of the responses. And I think it's really important to actually show the complete picture, because it felt like it was not the complete picture. So if you can update that slide with the additional information, I think that is helpful. And then my other question is, I'm still trying to figure out how sort of the systemic safety issues are being addressed, and with what pots of money and who's doing it. I'm only speaking from my experience and what I'm seeing here in Portland, but in the last, I would say month. Yeah, in the last month, there have been 2 pedestrians that have been hit and killed and died on Southeast Powell, which I believe is a state highway. And I think this stretch of road has experienced systemic safety issues since 2010. And I think since 2010, there have been 8 deaths. And so to me, and there have been some infrastructure improvements, but this is still like a significant issue, is dealing with traffic violence and these issues of pedestrians getting hit and killed. And so my question is, how are these issues being addressed? Because it's unclear to me where that's happening.
Well, that's a big question. How?
Sorry.
I'm trying to think of even how to start it. I mean, we've been working in our role, right? In our role, we've been doing both kind of as upstream and downstream as we can. And then also, so for example, with the blueprint for urban design, we did our best, and in a lot of work I'm really proud of in terms of applying policy to address some of the systemic safety issues in our design in that way, right? We work with our partners in delivery and operation and the all roads transportation, the arts program. I cannot remember what the S stands for at the end here. And they do have funding for systemic issues. We participate in the Transportation Safety Action Plan, but I'm describing little initiatives like all over the place, which I don't think is a complete answer. The thing that we are doing that in the public transportation division specifically for kind of that is to look at, with our strategic action planning work, to identify like a priority multimodal network that really narrows in on a couple of the key corridors, and then work on the funding up, like the kind of the very communicate like the very clear need on a robust funding in order to address some of those really significant systemic issues. That is a long-term approach, but it is an important approach. I do think that the Oregon Transportation Commission, for example, and our agency leadership is really starting to, not just starting, but is really recognizing the impact that we have, or the impact, really recognizing the number of pedestrian fatalities and the impact that has on the community and our transportation system. And there's a lot of change to steer the ship at the moment, but it's a big ship. Karen, I'm going to call on you, see if you have an additional answer here to this super meaty, important question.
Yeah, that is a really good and meaty question, Hal. Thank you. I think there's maybe a couple other things to highlight. Because it is owned in multiple places in the organization, how I think other couple of components that are happening right now is the EASY project. So that's the companion piece to the 10 million infrastructure, quick investments to make some safety and pedestrian safety improvements for our kind of some top priority projects that were identified, or corridors that were identified in the ATNI. So there's that 10 million investment that's currently being implemented across, I want to say 4 projects in different parts of the state. The companion piece to that is a scope of work, and I think Jessica's having computer issues and she can chime in with the details. But basically that scope of work is doing an analysis of a number of our funding programs that do look to target making pedestrian and bicycle safety improvements, and looking at things like, why does it take so long for us to, like, what are the data gaps? How is that data brought into the system? How are those improvements programmed? What are the opportunities for us to improve the speed with which we make some of these investments and improvements? Potentially there are some mitigations, some things that we can do really quickly. What are the potential things that we can sort of have pre-approval to do really quickly under a set of prescribed circumstances? What are the things that take perhaps a bit longer to do, but and what are the triggers for being able to do those? And then what are the things that are the larger, sort of bigger investments? Where that process will also be including a peer review where we bring and find out and try to learn from the best of our peers across the nation, as well as some other aspects to it. It will look at some of our existing programs and also look for other opportunities to change up how we do some of our programs so that we do have a greater ability to point greater funding at some of these emerging needs that maybe we could not have predicted, as well as needs that we know about and have identified through our various mechanisms. That was probably far more long-winded, but there's not any one place or one division that kind of owns and is responsible for improving pedestrian safety. We share it across divisions.
And I know I sound like a broken record because I feel like every meeting I bring up pedestrian safety, pedestrian fatalities, but it is a systemic issue. And I just, it's really hard, like not understanding like how it's being addressed. And I think it was helpful to hear from Amy and from her division. But as we're looking at our work plan and see where we can have an impact, I do think, like, to me, like this is personally, it feels like a priority, but it feels like also a priority. It could also be a priority for our committee somehow. So.
Yeah, I last meeting offered to be on that work groups. I think it's the EASY project is the name that's being used now, kind of evaluating how can we do better. So if other committee members have input, how specifically, I'd love to hear anything that you want me to bring to that group. And I think it should be incorporated into our OBPAC work plan update as well.
Did anyone else have additional questions? I'm going to recommend that we take a 5-minute break. And I know that we are behind in our schedule, but I do think a break is important. So if we can reconvene at 2:42, there, 5 minutes.
Hey, Karen.
Oh, sorry. Turns out I'm not muted. Whoops. Was that the point of the hey Karen?
Yep.
So you
Nothing
heard me,
scandalous, just wanted to let you know.
you heard me yelling, hey, when more people start coming back, we won't be able to yell across the whole wing like this.
Nope, didn't hear that.
Well, that is what I yelled.
Okay. Where are we now? Leanne. Is Leanne? Oh, Leanne's here. I see her.
I'm here. I'm going to be off screen, just having a little snack during Leanne's presentation.
It's all good.
I fully approve.
Okay, so Leanne, are you ready? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Do I share my screen, or Jessica, what's your
So
routine?
Susan is gonna share the PowerPoint for you. I got kicked off again. There's some sort of magic technical snafu at 2:30 on OBPAC meeting day that happens.
Every OBPAC meeting.
So Susan is our host for sharing content right now.
I
Thank you, Susan.
suspect it's your bad behavior, Jessica, if I'm going to be honest.
Or could it be some kind of reward? Like the fact that like your internet slows down means everything slows down. Well, thank you everyone for having me. My name is Leanne Ferguson. I'm the Safe Routes to School program manager. And as part of our rules for the Safe Routes to School program, we have a member of your committee on the Safe Routes Advisory Committee. Thank you, Mavis. And we also need to come and consult with you all at important key moments in the Safe Routes to School programmatic structure. So the Safe Routes Advisory Committee is preparing for the next solicitation. So this is a moment in time to come and do a consultation with you all to let you know what's going on and see if you have any words of wisdom or advice for the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee as they move towards 2022 and selecting new projects for Safe Routes to School. So next slide, please. The purpose of today's presentation will be to provide you a little bit of an update. And then at some point there was a request to see some of the completed projects. So we created slides for each completed project so that you can kind of get a taste of what the Safe Routes to School program is doing. So at a high level, our Safe Routes to School vision is that we prioritize underserved communities and we provide grants and resources to communities to help get kids to school safely. I like to talk about Safe Routes to School as a village. It takes a village to get our kids to school safely, and ODOT plays a part in that, mostly by offering grants and resources. Next slide, please. This is the our Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee. You'll notice that Mavis is on that committee, as well as Lauren Morris is also on that committee. So you actually have two members on the Safe Routes to School committee at this point. And we will be doing some recruitment in 2022 for a couple of additional members. Next slide, please. Our guiding principles were updated in 2021 by our committee. I'll get into a little bit more about this near the end of the presentation, but I want to point out some of the changes. Our committee uses these principles when making decisions together. One of the big changes is that we changed the formerly social equity sort of section to be called addressing transportation disparities. It kind of better says what we're trying to do. And we created sort of an overarching principle, which was racial equity. And we've had a lot of discussions about that. And we're still learning what that looks like in Safe Routes to School and how it applies to our decision making. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I won't get into it too much in this presentation. So if anyone wants to talk more about what's happening in this area, please feel free to contact me at any time. Next slide, please. So these are the programs that are a part of our Safe Routes to School menu of services and grants. We have the construction grants, which the next round will allocate about $26 million. We have rapid response grants, which are actually available now. They're for urgent needs that we can address quickly. We have the project identification program, which is our planning assistance, and we have about $750,000 for that, where we can send a consultant to communities to create a safe routes to school plan with the school district and the road authority. We also have $2 million in education grants and services that's run by the Transportation Safety Office. And all of these things will be part of our solicitation in 2022. Next slide, please. A little bit of an overview of that timeline is that in 2022, we will have all of our materials online in January on the Safe Routes to School ODOT's page. Then in March of 2022, we'll have our applications due for the planning assistance as well as for the education program. The full application will be due in March for the construction program. Part 1 of the application will be due in March, and then part 2 will be due in the summer of 2022. We've divided it up into 2 parts so that earlier on in the process, people can see how competitive that they're probably going to be, and it'll help them decide, oh, I want to fill out, maybe I only want to fill out 2 full applications instead of the 5 that I originally thought. It'll help save time at the local level when deciding how much time to put into the applications. Next slide, please. This is a messy slide. I apologize for all the words. This is the timeline that I kind of wanted to break it out for you all to see. In the different rows are the different programs, and in the columns are sort of the months of the year in 2022. I'll just kind of walk you through the construction one verbally, but you can kind of look at the education and the planning assistance. We'll open our application part 1 for 45 days in February. It'll be open until March 18th. We'll have a reviewing and scoring portion for that part 1. So we're able to communicate back to everyone who filled out part 1 about where their project would probably fall in the of all of the part 1s that were submitted. We should know about 80% of the score at that point. And so that's what we'll be able to share. We'll have our application part 2 open in May through, actually it'll be through I think it's through the end of July. I apologize, this is an inaccurate visual, but I'll double check that. And then we'll have a couple of months to review and score with staff. The Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee will make their decision, their recommendation in November of 2022, and then it'll go to the OTC for final approval. But honestly, where the SRAC, the Safe Routes Advisory Committee, has spent most of their time has been in setting the priorities and the scoring criteria. Next slide, please. I wanted to give you a kind of an overview of what's happened so far in Safe Routes to School and our sort of analysis of like, has our scoring criteria been working? So these are the projects that have been selected in the past 2 solicitations for the construction funds. And we have about 70 projects that have been awarded, equaling I think it's $44 million. And so we're starting to see some of those projects be built. Next slide, please. Some of the outcomes from these construction projects, what we did an analysis of like, what are people actually building? And most of the things that people are building are crossing improvements. So enhancements to crossings is what we're seeing a whole lot of. We're also seeing a lot of curb ramps and walkways. So those are kind of the 3 main things that we're building with these dollars. And that's kind of what we expected to build. Next slide, please. So is the scoring matrix working? So in general, we think yes. We have the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee has really prioritized income of school-related income, as well as safety, being sort of the 2 main things that we score. They also are really interested in the rural-urban divide, like are rural communities able to compete, as well as our small communities able to compete. So we fund all Title I schools, which are schools where 40% or more students are eligible for free and reduced lunch, and that is indicated through income levels. 83% of our funds will be spent on a priority safety corridor, which is a corridor, a road that has high safety, high crash risk factors. 62% of the funds will go to the highest percentage of low-income families, which means a school where 90% or more students are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So like our highest need schools are getting over half of our funds. 46% will be spent on areas outside of an MPO. So that's sort of how we're describing rural. 46% will be spent in a rural area, and 35% will be spent with populations under 5,000. So we know that the small communities are also able to compete even even using our scoring criteria. So in general, we think that things are working. Next slide, please. So I'll quickly go through all of the finished projects. So these are a couple of them finished since I pulled this presentation together, but these are the ones that were done when I made it for our September meeting. We have a finished project in Coos County, constructing a lot of sidewalks. Next slide, please. Deschutes County, again, we've got a lot of sidewalks, curb extensions, so some crossing enhancements and more sidewalks. Next slide, please. You'll start to see a theme here. We've got sidewalks. We've got, in this one, we've got a flashing beacon. So we're gonna go through these very quickly. Next slide, please. Coos Bay, here's more sidewalks and crossings. Next one. Cottage Grove, again, sidewalks and crossings. Next one. City of Eugene, this was kind of a unique application where they had a lot of different locations all over the city, but doing similar things at each location. So it was all in one big project. They're done. Next slide, please. City of Florence did a great RRSB. Next slide, please. City of LeGrand did some great sidewalks right next to the school. Next slide. City of Madras, some great new sidewalks and curb ramps. Next. Milton Freewater, great new sidewalks and crossings ready for that walking school bus that you see in that photo. Next slide, please. City of Salem, a nice new crossing. Next slide. And Tillamook, this is our first rapid response project that was finished. Some crossing enhancements at a crosswalk where several students had been hit in the 6 months prior to them asking for this grant. So this is like the fastest project that we have to date of where we awarded it and they built it and it's done. So a good example of the rapid response program in action. Next slide, please. So the Safe Routes to, so we're back at sort of these guiding principles for the Safe Routes to School program. In general, we are saying the scoring in general works. We think that we're funding the projects that we were thinking that we were going to fund. Some of the tweaks that we've heard from the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee are things like for the education program, they wanted us to better be able to tailor the program to fit the community, as well as really prioritizing communities with partnerships or prioritizing communities to build partnerships, because that's where a lot of successful programs come from, as well as do a little bit more tweaking around the equity criteria to kind of to embody the racial equity umbrella that we want all of our criteria to be under. And then for construction, we had some ideas to better consider the Transportation Disadvantage Index. That was a new tool that wasn't available before. And generally tweak equity a little bit more to help include racial equity, which we added as a new part to our guiding principles. So that's what we heard from the advisory committee around intersectionality and the tweaks that we made to the scoring criteria for both the education, construction, and planning assistance programs. Next slide, please. So the input that we want to request from you all is, do you have any other thoughts for the SRAC, the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee, as they head towards recommending another round of Safe Routes to School funds? I'm also happy to answer any questions, but I know we're short on time. So this is what I'm here for. So I want to make sure I get any thoughts that you have. And I think, Susan, I think you can probably take the slide down if you'd like to, so we can see faces. The rest is just my contact information. Yeah, Emma.
Well, first I will start with a comment. I just am in reviewing for today's meeting, I was just super inspired to see the amazing work that's happened across the state, both with the Bike Ped Strategic and the Safe Routes to School programs over the last 5 to 10 years. It's been totally transformational. And really, and when we were having conversations back in 2013, when I was starting as the Safe Routes coordinator in Springfield, thinking, oh, maybe someday we'll have an infrastructure program dedicated to safe routes again. That day has come and gone, and there's actually built infrastructure all across the state serving students trips every single day. So I'm just really inspired and want to say thanks to all the hard work that has gone in across the Bike Ped programs in the agency. I don't know what the latest status is. I think I brought this up at last meeting, but I'm curious about the crossing guard program and if there's funding for crossing guard programs, and particularly thinking about that with the lens of equity, knowing that schools who have more affluent families are more likely to have parents who can volunteer for crossing guards. And then the schools that are kind of lower socioeconomic schools are most likely to have worse safety issues and need the crossing guard program and also not have the ability to provide it as easily.
Great question. The short answer right now is no, we don't really have a crossing guard program. The Oregon Department of Education had one that was actually funded through ODOT, but it was pretty small. And I think that's getting shifted around. So there's some movement in like what's happening, but it was never enough to actually fund crossing guards at every school. I know that Heidi Manlove, who runs the education program, is really interested in how to support crossing guard programs, but we don't have anything on the ground right now. The grants that we have could support someone doing some crossing guard work, but we don't have a specific support for crossing guards at this point in time, but it's something that Heidi is really interested in. And I'm taking notes, and I will bring all of these I will bring all of this back to the Safe Routes Advisory Committee as like, hey, this is what OBPAC recommends us to start looking at.
And then Aaron has a question.
Yeah, it was more just commenting on just the presentation. Thank you so much for coming and presenting to us. I really like the rapid response project, because I feel like there is sometimes delay when problems are recognized to when they're actually solutions are implemented. So I really like that. And also I really like the slide that you showed of like the percentage of the scoring matrix, and it just really shows how we come up with a scoring matrix and then how it just kind of really helps guide the different projects that are funded. So definitely encourage the Safe Routes to School Committee to continue using that. And it just really shows how it's being used pretty effectively.
Awesome, thanks, Aaron. Mavis.
I just wanted to remind everybody that I talked with the committee about this prior, and you guys said we want more sidewalks infilled in between everything. And I think that they did it. So good job.
Yeah, I think that we're seeing a mind meld right now between our Safe Routes Advisory Committee and what's going on at OBPAC. So I appreciate all of your guidance.
Any other questions? Thank you, Leanne. It's always wonderful to hear an update on Safe Routes to School, a program that we all wholeheartedly support, and to see the progress that is being made in that area. So thanks for presenting. We have Alan and Marcia up next. We're about 15 minutes behind, but I'm pretty sure we can get caught up, hopefully, on this. So they're here to talk about the Oregon Community Paths grants.
All right, Susan, I guess can you share the presentation? All right, thank you, everyone. I'm Alan Thompson. I'm the Community Paths Program Manager. Next slide, please. So we're talking about the Cycle 2 Active Transportation, the Cycle 2 Community Paths Program coming up soon. And first off, for those new on the committee, a program summary of the program so far, lessons learned since the very first cycle, funding moving forward, and the new cycles. Next slide, please. So a recap is that this is a newish program that started that uses non-highway funds that allows us to go off-road. So we have state funds coming from Connect Oregon and also from a $15 fee on every bike sold in the state. And that goes into the Multimodal Active Transportation Fund. We also have some money from the Federal Transportation Alternatives Program that comes in, and that can also be used for off-system bike path. And all those combined create the Oregon Community Pass program. We fund two basic things. We fund critical links, which is like a first mile, last mile program for high need locations, which could be schools, downtown, shopping, employment, transit, and other destinations. So you can see how this complements what Leanne's doing with her work. And regional paths, which are long distance serving and connecting communities. That's where we have gaps in larger paths connecting communities, or it might be connections to paths that connect communities that may go for a while. Next slide, please. So since the last cycle, which projects were awarded in May of 2021, we surveyed every agency that submitted an LOI. We requested feedback from them. We also talked to all of the ODOT regions and transportation planning managers and program managers who would be responsible for implementation. And we surveyed you to find out what you thought. Major findings as it relates to OBPAC, refine the scoring criteria to make it a little bit more equitable, and to potentially increase the minimum funding on projects as the program moves forward. Next slide. So the anticipated solicitation cycles. So what we have is for FY 24 to 27, we have $36 million in federal funds, and that is allocated. So that is money that we can start to program. But we're still building up money from the Multimodal Active Transportation Fund because we have all that allocated for cycle one. So we're looking at two cycles, where cycle two will start in August of next year, and we will execute, get everything all together and done in October, and that'll be $18 million of federal funds. And then cycle three, which we'll execute in 2025, that'll be the other 18 million in federal funds. And that by that point, we think we'll have about $4 million, although it may be a little bit less. We're not quite sure yet. We're still trying to get forecast for that. We should have that soon. And so that way the money builds up, and then we can have a $22 million estimated for cycle three. And then cycle four will be 18, and then cycle five would be 24 again, depending upon how much federal funds we get. Depending upon what happens with the federal transportation bill, if and when that does come through, then we will adjust these numbers accordingly. Next slide, please. So feedback, one of the things that we're focusing on more on project refinement or construction. So in cycle one, we had $8.2 million in federal funds, and we committed 1.5 million of that for project refinement and 6.7 for construction. That comes out to about $18.3 million. Now we're dealing with $18 million in cycle two. And so we're wondering, should we keep the same ratio? Should we keep the same 1.5? Should we move forward? So this is where we thought we might be able to get some ideas from you. And I'll pause right there and open it up for questions.
Yeah, so Alan, this is Marcia. Let me take this one and the next slide so that you can take notes. Just to frame this up a little bit for the committee, in both this slide and in the next question we're going to put in front of you, we are, Alan referenced the cycles, the next cycles that we're starting to consider, and he referenced the lessons learned that we collected from a lot of the participants. Now we're looking to potentially make some decisions on program structure. So there are two questions that we're hoping to get feedback from you all on that we can consider as we make our decisions around the final program structure for the next round of solicitations. So Alan teed up the piece about using our federal funds for project refinement, planning grants, planning for future projects, or construction projects. And he referenced, and you'll recall, that there was discussion in the committee about this, and for the first cycle, you all landed on limiting funds awarded for project refinement in the interest of getting more projects out that would make a difference and be built and literally be constructed and on the ground. So the discussion we'd like to have is for cycle 2 and cycle 3. Should we continue to err on the side of, error is the wrong word, because of course we won't err, but land on the side of more construction projects, getting the paths built and the facilities in place? Or should we also start to balance that with directing or considering more dollars to plan for future projects? And it truly is a discussion topic that we'd like committee input on.
Do you want that discussion now, Marcia?
I think so. I think I'd like that discussion now, and then we have a second question that we want to put in front of you. So if Alan or whoever's got the slide up.
Mavis has her hand up.
Yeah, maybe take it down for now while we have this discussion. Thanks, Alan. Okay, Mavis has her hand up.
So if I remember correctly, Robert was one that had some really solid opinions on this, and I'd love to have somebody revisit with him on this, just because he's not here. But the way I see it, we have so many excellent projects that need done that the planning is already, I would like to err on the side of more construction, keeping in the mind in the future that we should pull back a little bit and do a little bit more on the planning side. But right now, I think we just have so many good options that we should keep hitting it while we can. That's it. Maybe I'll figure out how to take my hand down.
I'd love to hear from you, Mavis, if you think that the current split of like 4-to-1 is the right split, or if you think that we should err on the side of construction even more than that.
This is where I would like to have Robert's input, because he had very strong opinions about it because he works with it all the time. I just like to see more happening than more planning, particularly right now where we have such a backlog. But how? Your hand is up, not mine.
Well, I was wondering if Michael could provide some feedback, because this is an area that he works in as well. But thank you for mentioning Robert, because I felt the same way. Like, we don't have our expert here to provide some guidance, but I know that one thing that Robert and I have been discussing is that for trail projects that use federal funds, historically, and this is, I am hopefully not mincing words or not characterizing this incorrectly, but as Robert explained it to me, these projects historically are completed over budget because for whatever reason, maybe it's not scoped correctly, but they end up costing much more to the local agencies who receive these funds. And so that is a question that I have, is with these projects that are being constructed, you know, do you have any a sense of if they're on time, on budget, some of those aspects for us to sort of figure out what is the right balance between construction and project refinement?
Now, that's a good point, Hal. And of course, obviously, we're just executing the first agreement, so we don't have a lot of results in yet from the first round. But that was a point that came in, not just from you all, but from some of the other stakeholders we took a look at too. So that is a piece we're also considering as we start to design and structure the next round is, are there contingency amounts we should consider adding to construction projects? I mean, are we even in the right realm? Should we put a range around the projects? Those are the kinds of discussions, and we're vetting a lot of that with our region project delivery staff too, because they have a lot more experience with construction projects and a better sense of that. So I appreciate that input, and it is absolutely something we're considering as we look at the next round and how we structure it. And you saw in the chat that Jessica said we did reach out and got Robert's feedback on the next question, but we will make a point to loop back with him on this one as we try and land on where we want to go. I mean, we can certainly wait and see what comes in as well, but it would be nice to have in our minds whether at least from a committee's perspective, there's benefit to planning, and this sort of addresses the cost overrun piece too, right? Better planning for projects going forward. Or if we still are leaning on, and I heard this from Mavis and I heard it reinforced from you, that we have a lot of good projects already out there that we probably should be getting started on. Other Emma has her hand up.
Like Michael to go first.
Yep.
So I would just advocate for having contingency requirements as well. I think I think you're going to see through this process that there will be a lot of projects that have to find other funding to actually complete the project, because when it was scoped or bid, things have changed so much. Like, you can't, like, ordering a bridge right now. With steel issues and supply issues, delivery issues, things like that. Plus, we're also dealing with the issue with contractors and being able to get contractors, and contractors having ridiculous mobilization fees these days. And so there's a lot of things going on that make me nervous as being one of the recipients of this, and having an agreement with ODOT to build a project that we're going to have to come up with more money to make it. So I think with all the good work that everybody does to estimate and do their best, the prices are always going to change. There's always going to be factors that go into that, whether it's regional or whether it's supply issues or availability of these types of things. So I would advocate for a mandatory contingency amount, so that you get more projects finished without the recipients having to come back or find more money in the community to finish them.
Would project refinement help with that, Michael, or not?
I think project refinement, obviously the better prepared you are, the better prepared you are, and hopefully things will work out. But obviously what I'm talking about here is more the factors that are out of our control when it comes to actually building the projects.
Got it.
When you brought up the contingency and potential for having a mandatory contingency, that piqued my interest. And I think that would be having a minimum amount of contingency required for each project would be a good move to make, and making it significant.
Okay, excellent, thanks.
I knew you had something great to say. I agree with Michael and look forward to Robert's input as well. My first instinct is that the split of about up to 20% project refinement is good. It's in the ballpark, but I'd be happy to go a little bit either side. I worry about lowering project refinement too much, because that could cut out some communities who need to do some of that project development work to inform the cost estimate to then go for the construction grant. And so we don't want to be forcing communities into, oh, well, if we're going to allocate more of the pot to construction, kind of going out on a whim and hoping that they're in the ballpark, but not having things as well planned out as would actually be beneficial. And we also don't want to cut communities out saying, okay, either you have construction ready or this funding source is not available to you. Because we really want to make sure that across the whole state, we're helping move things forward with regional paths. So I think it's about right, but could go either way.
All right, not seeing other hands raised. The next slide, you can either bring it up, Ellen, or I can talk through it, either one. The next piece we're considering that we wanted to get your thoughts on is expanding project eligibility to include, sorry, I just had a bird hit my window and hence the jump. Expanding project eligibility to include protected on-road facilities. Separated on-street bikeways, if you will be. Obviously, this would be federal dollars. And we want to know what questions this raised in your mind, pros and cons that you could see to doing this. Some of the things we're considering is that if we did look at expanding project eligibility, how would we define a protected on-road facility? And how would those fare if we ran them through our current scoring rubrics? Sorry, having trouble with that word. So this really, again, is a point where we would very much appreciate your input as we consider what we want to do in our next round. So again, I think we can take the slide down and I would be looking for thoughts, impressions, things to consider that the committee might want to share. Al's got her hand up.
I think in general, it is really hard to find funding for off right-of-way paths. And to me, like to expand it to include protected bike lane, which should be paid for by the gas tax and other sources, is just sort of spreading the pot too thin. And so that is my gut when I see that. We are having a tough time funding paths, and as it is, I think we started out with like maybe being able to fund like a mile of paths in the beginning, and now we've expanded to, you know, maybe more miles of pathways, and so I just would be reluctant to expand the criteria.
Yeah.
I should comment that Robert Spruck mailed in a comment that echoed what Howe said, or vice versa.
So Robert weighed in similar to Howe's opinion.
Yes.
Okay. What would be some positives about doing that? Can anybody think of positives to expanding the program?
The only positive I see is if it's hooked into the other, you know, so if it makes it complete, like you run across the park and then you come into this other place and it's protected in a roadway, you know, so if it's a bigger project, I see where that could be advantageous. But yeah, this is a pretty special pot of money and I'd hate to dilute it.
Yeah, the
Great.
feedback.
I'm sorry. So the question is, should we expand the program to support physically protected bicycle facilities?
Yes. On road, if you will.
On road? I mean, I would, and I know this is my last meeting and stuff, but I'd say yes. I mean, why limit it to, I mean, what's the point in limiting it? If people, like the presentation we got earlier, if people are looking for physically protected bike facilities, then we should be using the funding mechanisms we have to help accommodate that. The other thing is with e-bikes, what I've noticed a lot with e-bikes, as great as they are, and I happen to be on the side of, you see an e-bike out there and that's an alternative mode of transportation, and people are choosing to do that as opposed to driving, and I think that's great. But you're getting a lot more people out there who are not necessarily the strong, fearless, but are biking around like they are, and having these facilities will, I think, increase safety, protected facilities, increase safety for those types of users as well. If you can figure out how to plan them so they work for assisted bikes as well as non-assisted bikes. So I see a lot of people riding bikes the wrong way and things like that with the e-bikes, because it's just all of a sudden this thing everybody's doing, and it's provided this mobility that they haven't had before. And I think we should do everything we can to save facilities out there. So hope I don't just jump in and throw this off track, but I would support that. Not that it matters. This is my last meeting. So.
Michael, your opinion definitely matters. That's what I said earlier. I value it. I guess my question to you is, because there are other funding sources for on-street within the right-of-way facilities across the state, I'm hearing that you want to take this fund, which is one of the only tools we have in our toolbox for off-street. We haven't even funded any bike ped bridges, but if the funding gets high enough, I would hope that we could start kind of checking off the list of some of the planned bike ped bridges across the state. And those are the types of things that, you know, gas tax couldn't cover. So are you saying it's more important to build out a more robust on-street network and kind of say, well, our planned off-street multi-use paths, tough luck? Or just kind of having it be broader and then evaluating once we get the applications?
I think just being broader, because, you know, the challenge that we've had with like safe routes to school is they have to be part of the right of way, right? So we've had that challenge in the past where you have to, you can't fund off-street paths, but we're just kind of reversing it now, where even if that's been addressed, we're kind of reversing it now and pigeonholing ourselves. And I would just advocate against pigeonholing ourselves so much that you have to change, make drastic changes about pace and policy down the road to support something like a bike path that's physically protected. That makes a lot of sense, which in some terms could even be considered off the road anyways, because it's physically protected from the road. So I would do for keeping options open so that you can approve the best projects in the future.
I guess what I'm sort of hearing also is the need for more funds to support local projects. And I think, like Michael, and maybe that's not what you're getting at with allowing protected bike lanes, but there's so few sources of funding that local agencies can use to build infrastructure. And so by perhaps adding protected bike lanes, it would allow that.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah, we should, again, I'll just say this. I think we should be funding the best projects. And when we limit what can be proposed, we might not be getting the best.
Brandon Mavis, how Michael and I have expressed our opinions. What are your thoughts?
I agree with what Michael is saying, but I also, you don't want to limit yourself, but the idea of these funds are very particular, and we don't want to silo it, because then you get like, you have to apply to 5 different agencies and 5 different things, and you get them all together to do one project, which is really not what we want to do. So I can see where Michael's coming from, where he's saying don't silo it, because then we're not necessarily getting the best project, we're just getting a project that fits our requirements. But I also have the whole idea of like, well, there really isn't much funding for this particular kind of path. And so to take that money and be like, well, we can also do it here. Yeah, I'm just leery of it. That's all.
No, good feedback. Good feedback for us. Aaron, you have your hand up too, and then we can wrap it up. Alan can go to his last slide, which I think is just a thank you, and you can move on with your next agenda item. So, Aaron.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment real quick. I understand like the want to add, on-street bikeways as part of the eligible projects because, it does increase bike safety around the state. But at the same time, I also understand that our pod is already spread really thin. If I remember correctly, we had a lot of applications for the first cycle. So I feel like there's already that demand. I don't think there's a need to expand it anymore. I think we have a ton of really good projects that would be able to use the money. And like the other committee members have said, it's a very particular criteria and it doesn't receive a lot of other funding sources. So I think keeping it as is might be the best option.
I have a compromise suggestion. There are a couple funding cycles, and as Alan touched on with the federal transportation bill, the funding could be increasing. My proposal would be to keep it just to the off-street paths. I mean, we could make an exception maybe for like a little connecting piece, a segment here or there that needs to connect for continuity, but keep it to the existing for this next cycle. And then if the funding increases significantly, then revisit this question and consider going more broadly.
My question is, why are you asking us these questions? Is there something that has come up that we would need to be aware of to make better decisions?
Oh, no, we are truly just getting ready to structure our next program. And a couple of this question and the previous one very much rose to sort of a policy level, policy with air quotes, right? That we wanted to make sure we had committee input on before we made our final decision. We didn't want to make our decision in a vacuum without consulting the committee.
And this is for 24, 27, right? When you say the next.
Yes.
The next program, okay.
Actually, of course, they might start in fiscal year 23, but
yeah.
But yeah, no, you're right.
Well, I hope the group would, I hope this wouldn't be the only discussion the group has on it, that, especially if anything changes, like more funding's available and things like that, the group would get another chance to talk about this.
Nope, it was speak now or forever hold your peace. Kidding. Well, of course, we would come back. All right, thank you, Alan. I think you just had a thank you slide, and then
that's it. Thank you, and that's it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Marcia. We are still behind schedule, so I'm just gonna. So we're not gonna take a break because we need to make sure we have time for the Mobility Advisory Committee updates. However, if we end early, then we can be done early and get your 5 or plus minutes back. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Karen and Bob and Nick.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Hal. I think that on this agenda item, I also just wanted to make note that we have a few of our colleagues from delivery and operations that are listening into this agenda item, folks that are staff to the MAC as well as their manager. So they're here to hear your feedback and this committee's discussion. And then I can share probably after Bob and Nick get a chance to give their updates, some results of some recent internal ODOT leadership conversations about the MAC as a result of some of the feedback that we've been hearing. But I really want to center Bob and Nick's feedback in the committee discussion first. So thank you.
And I know Nick wants to jump right in, so.
I was gonna let you go first, Bob. I think, Jessica, did you send us some prompt questions at some point?
I did. So I was gonna frame it up a little bit so the reason Bob and Nick are joining us today is because it was back in March of this year that they graciously agreed to serve as our pedestrian and bicycle representatives on the Mobility Advisory Committee, and they've been participating in those monthly meetings for, let's see, that's more than 6 months. a little bit, but the committee had asked for them to come back after they'd been serving for 6 months just to do a touchback to see how things were going over that same period of time. The committee's been working on developing a charter and doing a lot of work on their processes, though that charter is still in kind of a final draft format. And so I sent Bob and Nick some prompt questions to kind of help give a little structure to the report back that are primarily just, what's working well at the committee thus far. Are they feeling heard? What are some things that are still confusing that between mobility staff and active transportation staff, we can continue working together to provide more guidance and clarity. So.
Well, I'll jump right in because Nick is leaving me out to dry here. First of all, I just want to say that I came into this activity upon request. I had worked with ODOT on some other issues having to do with curb cuts and planning for bike ped issues. So I had a smattering of background, but I hadn't really delved into it, certainly on this committee. So it was a steep learning process. And I just want to say just off the bat that the ODOT staff has been consistently gracious, polite, helpful, and I think genuinely working hard to let me know how the process works, be very open to soliciting my input, and that's really been very enjoyable. The questions that I've had as I've gone forward is, well, how the heck does this work, and what is our authority, or what are you looking to us as a group to do? How is our voice, my voice as a representative of pedestrians, but actually as a full-blown committee member with an equal voice at the table, how do I effectuate my input? And so the way that it works is that what I've learned really is that the group is designed to work by consensus, and that if anybody on the committee has an objection to a particular project, that kind of stops the process in a sense, where so that more information is gathered or changes are made such that folks will come to an agreement. And in fact, ODOT has a very lengthy process that it maps out in a chart having to do with how it resolves things that for which consensus cannot be reached. That having been said, I think that there's still some questions out there that are being worked out in terms of the draft. I forget what you called it, but the draft plan in terms of how we operate, which would be useful because it's a little complicated by the fact that there's a number of functions that get done at this board, and they're kind of thrown together as far as I can see. And some are mandated and some aren't by state statute. So it's good to clarify those things. One thing I just wanted to raise, because I think that there are issues that have come up repeatedly that might be addressed in a different way, and this has been discussed. There's certain, what I would call kind of pinch points, where there's a difference of opinion really that about what should be a general policy. And probably the one that's most noticeable has been the concept of roundabouts. The trucking industry doesn't seem to be very warm toward the idea of roundabouts, and others are, including your pedestrian advocate. And that just comes up again and again. And whenever the topic of roundabout comes up, it creates a lot of discussion. And so I think that's one where we might have greater clarity in terms of, well, what's our general policy about this? And is there a template that we can use in terms of analyzing it as it comes forward? The other area that I've noticed is, and again, I'm new to this area, but really what we're often just talking about is that there's a certain amount of width on a road right of way, and how are you going to divvy it up? And how are you going to do it in a safe way? I think that certainly Nick and I are very concerned both about the amount of width that's dedicated for bicycles and other mobility devices, how that's separated from the path of travel for motor vehicles, and of course crosswalks. And particularly for me, crosswalks is an area that there are whether marked or unmarked, where people get hurt. And so that's something that we're very alert to. So I'm going to hand it over to Nick to pick up from me.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I also want to echo the staff comment that Bob made, that the staff are really supportive and do whatever they can to get you the information they need. The actual mobility staff. I think I also echo Bob's comment on roundabouts, and I would go a step further, and I worry because it's consensus based and that anyone can, say stop a project, that we're going to start designing all the safety out of roundabouts, and that's why roundabouts are roundabouts. So that's something I've kind of noticed over time is the freight industry keeps asking for certain things which start to water down all the safety impacts of roundabouts, and that is pretty concerning to me. And then, I think the blueprint for urban design is really starting to be accepted, but there's still enough flexibility in there that the rest of the group really tries to take as much as they can in terms of lane width and things that kind of water down additional safety aspects. So I think that's been I think that's just an ongoing process. I think, I don't know what the right word for this is, but, there's design staff that come and put a lot of hours into these designs to balance all these modes. And then they just kind of get one comment and they have to go all the way back to the drawing board. And I guess that's just kind of unfortunate, because I think we should be kind of trusting our professionals to do this work. So I guess that's another observation I've had. And then I think the team, the staff, and then the committee has been kind of receptive to, times where we've made, for lack of a better word, demands. So if they're going to look at changing lane width from 11 feet to 12 feet at a recent meeting, I said, well, don't take any footage from the bike lane. And that was heard. But I guess that kind of raises a concern of mine, which is like, if you're, if I, as just one person, wasn't at that meeting and there's 8 other people who are pushing to widen the traffic lanes, would the outcome have been different? And so I think that gets to Bob's maybe first point or second point about everything seems to be reactive in the meetings, and there's no kind of broader discussion about, what's a cross section that we can kind of collectively agree to that meets the balance needs, but also kind of speeds this process along. We'll spend, 15 or 20 minutes talking about lane widths of 11 feet versus 12 feet. And, the what if game of, well, what if this happens and what if that happens? And so that whole, I guess, event just doesn't really seem like a real a productive way to work together in my mind.
I just like to add a last comment, well, maybe a last comment, that I think it's really important that we have a seat at the table and that we have an equal opportunity to object. And a lot of this is project by project of having eyes on. It's very important, but there's also broader issues, I think, that to the extent that we can address them are important because we are asking for certain changes, really, and attention to certain road use. And that is, so there's, I would just suggest that the pressure in a sense is coming from us toward change. And so the traditional authority here is the industry, is the freight industry. So in a sense, we're asking for a different way of looking at the use of the roadway. So those questions will need to be tackled, probably not with us looking at it a case-by-case basis, but certainly in terms of broader policies, and having those policies in place that we could point to would probably help us if we in a situation where we're arguing about a particular road use.
And I mean, even if we are arguing, there's 5 to 8 members of the freight industry, and then me and Bob, and so they don't even all have to show up every meeting to have a majority vote over us. And so I think that just reinforces his point about the pressure.
Other questions?
Well, I just want to say thank you both for being here and providing an update, and more importantly, for the hours that you have put in with service to represent pedestrian and bicycle perspectives on the Mobility Advisory Committee. Those have been positions identified that should be on that committee for a number of years, and that was not happening. So I'm glad that myself and Lake were invited into the charter development process, and that was a successful outcome of participating in that, is that we now have both of you consistently attending the meetings, and when you're not able to, myself and Mavis are alternates. And so I was wondering if Mavis has anything that she'd like to share. I know that she's covered at least one of the meetings in the last 6-ish months. And then I'd also like to ask the question, a lot of this stemmed from the Secretary of State audit. And so I'm curious if either of you have things to share on your perspective of whether the detailed out action items that needed to be resolved have been resolved, or if there's a role for OBPAC to play in supporting resolution of the items that were found to need action in that audit. So maybe Mavis, and then back to both of you for that question.
I think what you guys have said was put very eloquently. I support everything that you guys brought up, and it is very frustrating because it seems like you are being placed in a point of contention, which, as somebody who is not paid for your time, it is very hard to walk into a room and be the point of contention. So thank you for doing that. And that's what I have to say about that. Now you guys get to talk more.
Well, as Nick knows, I'm no stranger to contention, so that's not a problem for me. But I just like to look to the tools that we have to make our points. And I know that there's some unresolved issues around the Secretary of State's audit. I'm not prepared to speak to them myself, but I think that the model that this committee uses is it's a consensus model, which in theory means that everybody has to come together on a particular issue. But there is a power differential in the room. And so that raises some issues about when anybody has a problem with a particular project, how does it get resolved, and what sort of influence do people have outside of the meeting? And I don't know, but there's a little lack of clarity about that. I'm not expecting us to have quote unquote decision-making authority as a group. I don't think that's actually legal, frankly, in my personal opinion. But I think that in terms of making sure that our voice is heard, it's good to have all of the whole process outlined pretty clearly, so everyone knows how it works, that it's transparent, and also that that whatever power differentials that are traditionally there are addressed. I'm done, Nick.
I agree with Bob. Well, and I guess to maybe just to write another example of that power differential. So there was a series of projects in Bend. They were roundabouts. They were on a extremely tight schedule due to federal funding. There was a mayor, 2 county commissioners, and a city manager there, all who voiced support for the project. But the freight industry didn't support it. And so there was, I think there was a majority vote to support it, but I still think the project kind of had to go back to the table a little bit to meet the needs of the industry. And so I guess that just from an outside perspective, I just don't know about kind of that from a process standpoint.
Well, not to take up your time, but the process right now is that if you have a situation like that, the way it's outlined is that it could ultimately go up to the ODOT director, and that's going to take time. So it does, there's a built-in delay mechanism. So you can have an entire city in their community wanting to do something, and there could be quite a bit of delay built in by someone who wanted to, put up some roadblocks, no pun intended.
I have a question. I'm just curious as you're talking because Nick, you had mentioned and I appreciate both of your service on the committee and coming to our committee to share your experiences. But you had mentioned there needs to be more trust in the design staff, and it just brings up the question: what are the data and the research? How is that being used to support decision making versus just perspectives, right? And opinions. Because it seems like some of these decisions should be more of based on expertise, right? Versus the wants and needs of the freight industry. How does that come into play? How do data and research come into play in decision making? Because they're not engineers, right? Are these freight experts road transportation engineers? I think their interest is moving freight, right? And getting their trucks through.
Well, I think we rely upon the staff for that expertise. And I honestly have been very impressed by the presentations and I think that for the most part, my impression has been that they know what they're talking about, that they're they have they've brought forward reasonable proposals. They've reviewed different options and they've explained why other options may not work so well, and that's why they come in. But yeah, I mean, none of us are on the committee generally are coming in with data. And again, Nick, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this, but a lot of it is, well, 14 feet wide is it's not as good as 16 feet wide. I mean, that's kind of, we get it, and where are you going to get that next foot in terms of usage of the road? What I haven't heard a lot of frankly, and I'm hoping to get more of, is about pedestrian use. For our ODOT representatives, I mean, how it works on my end is generally I will ask a question about how does this affect. Gee, I noticed that there's a bunch of houses on one side of the state road, and there's a store, the one store in those rural communities on the other side. So I assume people have to get across there, or there's a community and there's a school or a recreational facility on the other side. And what normally happens is ODOT has said, well, we'll ask the people who are making the proposal about that, and they'll come back and say, oh yeah, we're going to take care of that. And I don't have the technical expertise to go deeper in terms of, well, exactly how are you going to take care of that? And have you measured the number of people who use that intersection or might use the intersection if they're or a crosswalk there? I don't get that level of detail back or data collection. I had normally gotten back, oh yeah, we'll take care of that. So that's made me a little nervous, frankly, but I'm not sure, without again delaying a project or asking for something that might not be fiscally achievable in terms of information gathering, how far to push that. I just haven't really known. And I think that that's something, at some point there would be better to know that, or in terms of, I don't want to go too long, but in terms of, well, how is the city planning to expand its residential areas and its commercial uses, and how are people who traditionally, most people drive to that store, but particularly poor people don't. How are they going to get there, and what's the risk going to be to them? And I don't really get a lot of hard information back about that. So good question.
I think the designers are using kind of data and best practices to present designs, but to our earlier point, when you function on a consensus basis, if one person has a problem, then that stops the process, and one person can have a problem whether or not they have data, an experience or an opinion behind it. So I think that's been my observation.
So I have one quick question.
Pick me. That's my question.
Okay. Can I ask one question that mobility staff had said that they wanted us to discuss that I don't know if we've touched on, and then hand it over to you, Karen?
Sure.
So one of the things that when Donnell and Christy and I had sat down that they were kind of curious of is, like, if the magic wand question of if there was something that you could change or a resource that you could have at meetings to make it run more smoothly, what would that be?
You have to answer first this time, Nick.
I don't know if that's a question we should answer versus like how could the process be smoother, or maybe that's the same question. Yeah, I don't know.
In terms of process, I think again, I really think that the staff has been doing a fantastic job, and I've felt well treated. I think the presentation, I would like presentations to spend a little bit more time on pedestrian issues as a general matter, because I still think they're an afterthought. And that is represented both in terms of it's always the last thing on the bottom of the sheet, and it's always generally pretty perfunctory in terms of what's mentioned. And so I'm thinking that over time, there will be more attention to that. I think probably it's such a we're statewide activity where you have a lot of people involved who may not pay as much attention to what I'm interested in as I am. But anyway, so that may be one thing. But I think it's a small quibble actually, because I think the staff are dealing with more than me, but I'm hopeful that as Nick and I contribute more, that they will pay attention, that the initial presentations will address our issues more.
So that I did think of something. Sorry, Karen, real quick. So this question of like consensus versus us being advisory body seems to keep coming up at meetings, and there's never really a great answer, in my opinion. It's like, well, we are advisory, but we strive to reach consensus, but how that plays out is consensus becomes the end goal, and we do everything to accommodate anyone's concerns. And so to me, that's not advisory, I guess. And so that could be maybe something could be addressed there.
That is like the most excellent segues of all time, Nick. Bob and Nick, I just echo other folks' sentiments about the contributions you're making and the time that you're spending. Thank you very much. As some of you probably know, as some of you absolutely know, our team, Jessica and others, continue to have ongoing coordination with mobility staff, with delivery and operations staff. And recently, we have had, as recent as maybe it was yesterday, I think it was yesterday, a conversation where we brought in the current, the interim delivery and operations administrator, David Kim, who's the statewide, and I'm probably going to get your title wrong, David, but statewide project delivery branch guru. I don't know what that is, manager, as well as Steve Cooley, who's the state engineer. And we had a really robust conversation about the Mobility Advisory Committee. So I was really starting from the place of the ability of the agency to deliver bike ped improvements and projects that benefit safety for pedestrians and cyclists. As we have this big infusion of cash is coming, more projects are coming, and how is the Mobility Advisory Committee functioning in a way that could potentially impinge on that body of work. And so I think some of the big takeaways from that conversation, we talked about a lot of different topics that relate to both upstream involvement and engagement, as well as kind of the process and the role and the work of that committee. There's a big recognition by statewide project delivery branch and regions that we're going to have more of these types of projects, not these types, because we haven't even really had strategic bike ped projects showing up at the MAC yet, but projects that do have those safety improvements. And I think there's a big commitment, and this, what I heard today, I think was really reinforcing of this need to clarify the advisory nature of this committee, except for when it comes to the 366 route reduction projects. And this, the group yesterday spent a lot of time sort of talking about that. And I think David, has a few comments he wants to make in that regard, and the mobility staff are within his group. And so I guess I would turn it to him at this point.
Great, thanks, Karen. I want to just start off by saying thank you to the advisory committee for having both Emma and Lake participate on the charter development. They've spent a lot of time and effort and really provided a more of a balanced perspective to that charter. It certainly made our freight partners a bit uncomfortable because we have been operating without a prescriptive process. And it still continues to make them feel uncomfortable. And then to formalize and have both Nick and Bob participate on the committee and bring that balance to the table has been value added. I appreciate their genuine observations that they've shared with the committee today. We've come a long ways from the last 2 decades with the committee. It was housed in the former motor carrier division, or now known as Commerce and Compliance, and now they're integrated within my branch. And so they're more of our process. And over the last year, they joined statewide project delivery in July of last year. And just over the last year and a half, I've learned a lot about the complexities of freight, from overdimensional loads and permits to annual trip permits. And every route is different, every route is unique. There is an opportunity in front of us today with this charter. The door is open, it's not closed. And there's a long history that we're having to work through. I think there's a lot of perceptions out there of what is the role of committee. Are they truly advisory, or are they ones that make the decision? And we're always striving for consensus, right? Getting perspectives. But I will say this, at the end of the day, when it comes to projects that come before the MAC, it is ODOT's decision to make. Our engineers will not make an unsafe decision. That is clear. They are advisory, and we do solicit feedback and input. And I think having a bicycle representative and pedestrian representative on the committee is going to continue to help ensure that there is balance. We recognize that there's been a very, very large commitment of investments, $100 million more in the next STIP cycle as it relates to active transportation. And I think there's facilities on the state transportation system where bike, ped, and freight can coexist. And I think there's other facilities where there's going to be conflict. And I think there's a lot for us to learn about freight, and there's a lot for us to learn about bike ped. And it would be cool. One of my visions would be to have the MAC members come to this committee and have a joint meeting and just understand and get some alignment, and ideally get some programmatics in place. What we're encountering these days, I think we've worked through a lot of the roundabout conversations. The projects in Bend are moving forward. I think we have about 8 projects in design. Several are moving forward. We do have a research project underway with Oregon State University as it relates to congested roundabouts and impacts to safety of freight. I think there's definitely challenges that lie ahead as it relates to road diets, lane diets, and changes to cross sections. And I think freight is a place where we're going to have to strive to provide all lenses. I feel like sometimes ODOT's stuck in the middle, right? Trying to meet the needs of freight, but also trying to meet the needs of bicycles and pedestrians, and looking at our equity lens and the climate lens and priorities there. So more work to be done, and certainly changing the culture or perception of they make the decisions. It's ODOT makes the decisions. They are advisory. Except when it comes to the 366 routes, they have the ability to escalate that all the way to the director or the Transportation Commission. And we strive not to go there. We strive to reach consensus and balance. And in instances where we are struggling, we'll have more internal conversations and dialogue. And it's great that ODOT set up Karen's whole division now to where we are gonna have more conversations internally from a policy standpoint of what constitutes balance and what constitutes meeting the needs of the system. So it is a work in progress. The charter is not a one and done thing. We'll continue to refine, and 6 months from now, a year from now, we'll go back and look and see what's working well and what's not, and course correct.
Silence. Thank you, David. Appreciate that, and I know that Nick and I both, at least I do. I hope that there's a, I guess, having done this for 6 months, that there's a sense of good discussion about our issues, and a sense that now you have to decide whether to stop a project that's really needed over your objection. And I think I haven't become comfortable yet doing that. I don't, but I can imagine somebody doing that at the way it's structured. And I've certainly seen some of the freight interests do that, I think.
Yeah, the good news is we haven't had a project that's been stopped. We've had projects that have moved forward. Certainly, the Lombard project was a very challenging project to get through in North Portland. Freight had pretty significant objections, but that's in construction now. The project out in Stanfield, where it was adding bike lanes and a buffer, there were challenges there. That's in construction now. And then the project in Seaside, we have a cross section that's going to work. I think the opportunity that lies in front of us today is that we need to get these projects in front of everyone early. All these roundabouts were way late in design, and a lot of these projects are coming in really last minute. And ideally, if we can get these projects in planning or in concept design, or before 30%, would be the ideal place where we can have dialogue and conversation, rather than, to next point, we spent all this time and effort to basically a final set of plans and try to get that sign off. It's like, oh, that's not going to work, back to the drawing board. And that's not ideal. And so we're trying to clear the pipeline right now. And that's what happened with a lot of the roundabouts, is they were well past 30-40% design. And by that time it's too late. And so having to kind of spin our wheels a little bit, but we have a lot more there now in that planning realm, where we're having conversations and dialogue to where it's like, these are the 5 alternatives. And there are certainly certain facilities that Freight doesn't care about. We had the roundabout in Region 3 where it's like, well, it's on a local system. Freight really doesn't use that route. Have at it. And I think that'll play out with some of the active transportation projects too. There may be certain facilities where they're not going to really care, but there's going to be others that do. And flagging those and having early dialogue and conversation, I think, is where we can really benefit from that committee and other committees like this committee as well.
I think part of what we've also been talking about is, where is the right place to have those stakeholder conversations? Is it at the MAC, or is it at the regions and earlier in the process, where you can bring together the people who are directly impacted in the corridor, as well as in those cases where there are log haul truckers using that corridor, getting that kind of representation to come and participate in those regional and local processes, instead of where it's happening now, late in the process and at the MAC, which probably isn't the best place for those conversations. So that's to give you a flavor without giving you too much flavor, because we still have a lot to figure out with regions and headquarters, but we're working on it.
I see Emma has her hand up.
I really appreciate your last comment, Karen. I know the Lane Area Commission on Transportation has often had trouble filling the freight industry representative position on the act. And I think that is one role, as well as the technical teams that advise on projects across all the different regions in the state. It can sometimes be difficult to get the freight industry to participate at that level, but I think that's a very appropriate and useful way to meaningfully engage in corridor facility planning, et cetera. I wanted to ask 2 quick questions. One was whether mobility has ever solicited input from the communities or projects that come before the MAC to kind of do a feedback survey of what's working, what's not working well. Are there challenges that people going through the process are experiencing? If there's some common themes that might help highlight some areas to work on. And then to Bob and Nick, I'd love to just ask, what, if anything, can OBPAC do to further support your work on the MAC to ensure that these projects all across the state are supporting people walking, biking, and rolling in Oregon?
In terms of a survey, we haven't done a survey either with our communities. We really look to the regions to be the point for doing surveys of what's working, what's not, right? The region delivery arm is responsible for scope, schedule, budget of projects and the public involvement piece. Internal to ODOT, I think we've done some surveys, and there's a lot of training that's needed of our project managers to understand what concerns freight has from a permanent impact and a temporary impacts. And so what we've done is we've created what's called regional mobility liaisons that are going to be kind of similar to the active transportation liaisons in the regions, to help regions along with understanding, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and and certain projects, yeah, these you might want to worry about, these others should be okay. So it's a growing process. It's going to continue to mature, and one of the ODOT's values is unity, one ODOT, and just because mobility is in my portfolio doesn't mean I'm all about mobility. I'm all about what's the best thing for the transportation system, looking at that it serves all. And so having conversations and collaboration partnership with Karen and her team, we want to support them just as we want to support our mobility programs as well.
You're going to out-silence me, Nick. Two things, I guess. One is that I love the comment about more local input. I think that in one of the projects that were brought to us was about early on was about changes in McMinnville to how they were going to structure a particular road. And many years ago, I lived there, and I bicycled that road and I walked that road, and I knew it pretty well, and where there were danger points and how I went to avoid those danger points and all those such things. It's really valuable to understanding the project. So that local input is invaluable. And the second thing is something I mentioned earlier, is that in teasing out some of the major issues that would come before the MAC repeatedly, knowing your committee's view on those would be really valuable for me, just to have a broader sense rather than just basing it upon my own experience.
I guess I can't think of something kind of in particular that I need. I guess it, I think Bob and I have kind of touched on, there's a lot bigger issues at play here, kind of. And so I think maybe thinking about how you all could support that effort. I don't know where to seek that feedback, if it's from, ODOT design staff, or if David has ideas, or if mobility staff has ideas, but, I think, yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Appreciate that input. I did want to thank David for offering both to me by email a number of months ago, which I mentioned to the committee, and then reiterating today the invitation to have a MAC OBPAC meeting. That Howard and I have talked about more kind of modal committee liaising, because we had the opportunity to participate in a consultant-driven conversation with other modal committee leadership, and that was a really fantastic opportunity where there seems to be much more common ground and shared vision than I think sometimes comes across in how some of the conversations and narratives are portrayed. So I really welcome that, and would look to put that on the schedule at some point. We can work with Jessica to figure out when. And then I think the points that you just shared, Bob, about, how can we as a committee articulate some principles to support you in representing walking and biking interests at the MAC table would also be helpful. I did want to let both of you know earlier on the agenda, Erin is helping lead, and I'm participating in a work group to start doing another round of outreach focused on connecting with the local bicycle and pedestrian advisory committees, active transportation committees all across the state. So that could be an opportunity to connect with individuals who are serving on like their city bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee. And say you have a project like the one in McMinnville, and maybe there's a bike ped committee in McMinnville, there might be a way that we could tie you into that and help connect to locals. So if you see some projects coming up on the next agenda, you could maybe email some folks on the local committee saying, hey, by the way, we see this is coming up. Do you have any input that might inform how you participate in that conversation at the MAC, if that might be helpful?
So I think I was just
I
going to
was
say,
going to jump in very quickly and just say, because I'm reading some of the comments on alongside, and I absolutely agree that I think equity and environmental issues are very important, and how they would interweave with our task. Certainly, the equity one's a little bit more straightforward in terms of membership, and on the environmental side, it seems like it's a huge issue, as we know, and I think that goes to some of the policy questions. It's hard to think about, at least right now, for me to think about how that ties into any specific project, but school me.
I'm also seeing a comment from Sarah with Street Trust about House Bill 2985. I was wondering about this earlier in the meeting. That bill, I believe, is the one that was talking about diversity on ODOT committees, which the MAC is an ODOT committee. So David, do you have anything that you'd like to share in relation to implementation of that?
yeah, I have not gotten any direction yet from the government relations staff in terms of which committees and how that's going to play out. So we're still waiting for guidance. I don't know when that law actually comes into effect, if it's January, but there'll certainly be a transition plan to identify with the stakeholders or the committee members of the MAC. How do we ensure that we meet the intent of that law? And then I just got a note that we're working on it.
Yeah, I was just going to tag on to that because I know with our modal advisory committees that there's some foundational work in place right now. So there's some committees applies to, and there's some that it does not. However, it is still within ODOT's strategic action plan values around bringing that spirit and intent to all of our advisory committees. So that's some additional information I'm aware of that I would share with this body.
So I guess another.
Go ahead.
I was going to say another. Bob, I think you're just sharper than me. It takes me a while to get to where I'm going with my thoughts. Something that could be useful, and the committee could help with this. I think with the approval of the mobility team or David and Karen is, really this idea of like what a preferred cross section is, or what a couple preferred sections. There's going to be, I think our roads are more similar than they are different. And so there's always going to be cases where there's an anomaly that needs to be maybe talked out in person. But even the freight industry has kind of said this at different meetings that, if there's a agreed upon cross section, we could really start to kind of move things along here, and have, again, have that conversation on its own, as opposed to have that conversation a dozen times on different projects, I think would be really useful. And so I don't know really where to send that or where to put that, but I'll kind of offer that up.
I think that's an outstanding suggestion. When we look at the members that make up the trucking industry, they're heavy haulers, right? So their lens is purely, how can I get my load through safely on the corridors that I use? I don't think they have an idea of what a good safe cross section is for bike ped. And I think coming up with something and saying, this is kind of what we strive for. How can we achieve balance where the funds are being made available to make those improvements? I think that's a fantastic suggestion. And in fact, what we can do is work with Karen's team and get some of our designers together to come up with some standardized cross sections, and maybe do a short presentation to the MAC saying, from a bike ped perspective, we know that there's going to be more of these types of projects in the pipeline with our STIP. So how can we be proactive and work through these now versus project by project? I really like that suggestion, Nick.
I too like having a guiding framework. I'm a little bit confused, and I'm hoping you can help answer this, is we put a lot of effort into participating in the development of the blueprint for urban design, and that has different land use based contexts. of, in this context of land use, here's the cross section. You always start with the wider pedestrian and bicycle facilities. If they can't fit for whatever constrained reasons, then there are exceptions to narrow down from there. And so where is the BUD falling short? I know it doesn't address roundabouts, and I've heard that brought up several times. So maybe there's an opportunity to have a conversation about, okay, how do we approach roundabouts in a way that's going to fulfill the multimodal transportation needs, also achieve the safety goals, since that's a key charge of the MAC. But is the BUD not functioning how it's supposed to, or is it on interstates or other types of facilities that it doesn't apply to? What's not working?
I think with the blueprint for urban design, we're starting to do more internal training on the intent and purpose of the blueprint for urban design. And that is that historically, prior to the blueprint for urban design, we had the highway design manual. And any designer that deviated from that, the HDM, right, would have to submit a design exception, a very arduous administrative process. Now that we have this blueprint for urban design, which really supplements the highway design manual, it gives the designers that flexibility. It does not preclude them from still doing the stakeholder engagement piece. And I think where we're missing the mark is what I've heard from a couple of designers. Well, it meets the BUD, so we're good. Well, did you go out and talk to the stakeholders? Well, no, I didn't. Well, you need to, because that could change the design, because it's a performance-based design approach. And so we can't just say, because the BUD says you can do this, you can do it. It's a similar thing would be like access management, where from a safety perspective, we're going to put a median down the middle of the highway and prohibit all these left turns. It's safety. We can do it. The design standards say we can do it. Well, did you talk to the businesses? No. And so part of that stakeholder engagement process is a piece that we need to loop back with our design team, saying you need to have those conversations early and often with all, so that we understand what we're designing is going to work for everyone, and not just say, well, this is what we're going to do. And next thing you know, we have a finished product that is going to create issues for some or all.
I think, as you can see, there is a lot of passion on this topic. And I think you've also heard that there's a recognition that we have more education to do. We have more work to do in terms of balancing perspectives. We have more work to do and making sure the MAC is advisory. And I think you heard just some snippets of ideas today. A lot of our really robust conversation really is fresh off the presses. And I know David has follow-up conversations to have with his team, as I do with mine. So I'm cautioning both David and I to not get too far over our skis in our conversation with you today. By saying it out loud to both of us at this moment.
I do have a comment for Bob and Nick. If you're going to review the project on Highway 30, which I think is a freight route, and that also used the blueprint for urban design it's the section near the St. John's Bridge to Northwest Industrial area. And there was a pedestrian that was killed in September. So the design that is being moved forward is, it is a buffered bike lane, but it's really no more than a wider shoulder for bicyclists. And there are I think there are some pedestrian improvements going in too, but to me, like, that is the classic example of, my question, like, why was the BUD used in the design, and why isn't there any vertical delineation or any, could they have done better than just designing a buffered bike lane in this freight corridor that is being used by pedestrian and bicyclists? So.
And I'm not sure that's something David could speak to. That's probably more of a Jessica following up with region staff on that. How? I don't want to, because I suspect there, as always, there's more to the story. So what were the pinch points that caused certain design decisions to be made? So.
Sure. Absolutely. But as
your point isn't lost, though. Your point is not lost.
I just feel like that's a classic example. So ODOT has an opportunity to do something better. And it's again, like, it's not that much better as far as bicyclist safety. So.
And
I guess-
let me just jump in and say, I think that's a really good example of where I feel tension in my role, because I bicycled over that bridge many times. I've walked over that bridge many times. And to use the vernacular, it sucks for a bicyclist. It's really dangerous. It's dangerous if you get up on that little sidewalk thing. It's dangerous if you stay down on the road. And I've had guys in pickup trucks come by and do the air horn at me because they think it's hilarious that I'm out there. So that's just the experience of a bicyclist going across the St. John's Bridge. So I just think it's inadequate. Now, if I say that, what happens? I don't know. I think the whole design needs to be changed. I know we had another issue at St. John's Bridge having to do with rocks coming down on the what is it, the south side of the bridge, where the freight industry folks had some very serious objections to the proposed plan in terms of how to make corrections there that need to be made. And I can tell you that bike and pedestrians was very minor part of that discussion. I don't know what you thought about that, Nick, but it just got lost in the broader conversation. And again, I've walked and bicycled that many, many times, and I know a lot of other people do, a lot of commuters do. So I'm just saying that in my role, I would not be satisfied personally with that from my own experience, but I'm not sure, you know, how much I could object in that forum.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, hopefully we've gotten this across, but I think there's bigger issues at play than just kind of, you know, Bob and I trying to advocate for bike and ped infrastructure at these individual meetings. I think design staff are doing the best they can, but they are squeezed in 1,000 directions. And, you know, to David's point, when there's flexibility, that leaves room for negotiation. And that's where things start to kind of go off the rails. And I think a lot of these questions start to become like broader policy level questions that, you know, I would guess ODOT is probably grappling with kind of internally as much as kind of we're all kind of discussing it.
Nick, we don't say go off the rails or get thrown under the bus or any of those things. I'm just saying.
Noted.
But in terms of the process, when we were discussing the rock fall, it was a note that one of the alternatives was send people down over the Fremont Bridge and up north. And boy, I wouldn't want to go there. Enormous amount of time delay. And so as an advocate who didn't like the present solution, it creates sort of a little pressure to make compromises in ways that I don't quite understand how that's supposed to work if I'm voicing the perspective of a certain group, if that makes sense.
Well, we really thank you for your time, and we don't have any time left for our not on agenda items. I apologize, but I felt like this discussion was really valuable, and we wanted to provide that space for folks to hear from you, as well as hear from David, and then to provide some input back to you. So thank you for attending our meeting. Jessica, did you have anything else? Because you were unmuting at the same time as me, so I didn't know if you had anything else to add before we wrap up.
Nope, I was just going to give a time check, and you beat me to it. So I do see that David put in the chat that maybe a suggestion of having another 6-month check-in or a year from now, just to see how things are progressing with this conversation. So I will put that in the agenda build for the committee.
That would be great. Thank you all for hanging in there, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.